up, Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, my lord?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You will bring me. Captain Honor, I do not know what strength is in my blood. I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
Alright, people. The intro was weirdly laggy for me. I don't know if it was laggy for you. I don't know if that's my problem or all of your problem. I'm gonna blame all of you. But hopefully everything's good. Let me know in chat. I'm keeping an eye on chat if everything seems normal. And if it doesn't seem normal, then I don't know. I don't know what to do about it. I have no solutions. I'm just looking to see if there's problems. So let me know. Welcome to The Narrative. This is episode 17. And I decided to stop fucking around. I decided that tonight we're just going to cut to the real shit. I've got no notes. I have 0 notes on tonight's episode because what happens is I come up with notes. I bring a guest on. We don't address any of the notes at all. And everything's fine. So I figured this time we're just going to not have any notes. We're going to get to the shit. The Sovereign Alliance is something that I believe that I coined, even though I don't know what Grok will tell you, but you should ask the AIs, actually. I mean, I'm curious. Ask them who coined the term the Sovereign Alliance and see if they know about your friend Burning Bright. But catch-all term used to describe the international global reordering of a move from the super gay world order that has been the case to something much more based that we've been talking about, right? Seeded into the Q drops, something that I put a little moniker on. My guest tonight talks about it about as much as I do. And, I think we both are pretty well versed, or we have a lot of ideas about each player in what we dub the Sovereign Alliance. But I also think that we have focused in different areas on different players in the Sovereign Alliance. So we're going to talk about that. That's kind of going to be the bulk of the episode. What is the Sovereign Alliance? The reason I wanted to do this tonight is because I bring this term up a lot as a catch-all. And in the info war, there's a lot of catch-alls, right? There's like nothing can stop what's coming. There's all these different terms that we use, but sometimes we forget to really flesh out what we're actually talking about. So outside of my writing, I don't think I've actually done a show where we've just straight up talked about the Sovereign Alliance. What does it mean? Where did it start? How far back does it go? What are the end games? What are the end goals of the Sovereign Alliance? Who's a part of it? And what are each of their individual goals? Of course, we're not going to cover everything in one show, but tonight is an attempt to give sort of a surface level view of what we're talking about. We're going to try to hit what we see as the 4 key players in the Sovereign Alliance, given that the United States is a given as one of those under Donald Trump. So we're going to talk about that. Start of the show, we'll probably talk about some of the tariff shenanigans that we've been talking about for the last few days, for the last week on Badlands. So we are going to get to all of that. Before we do, I want to thank a couple of our sponsors tonight. First sponsor is River BTC. Friends at River. River announces Bitcoin interest on cash. Now US dollars in your River account will earn a high yield interest rate that can be paid in Bitcoin. With the price of groceries, mortgages, tuitions on a steep rise, people are now looking at a retirement age of 80 instead of 60. It's all because dollars are losing value at a record pace. The challenge is finding a way to hold on to your dollar while still getting ahead. That's where River Bitcoin comes in. River Bitcoin's interest on cash protects your dollars with FDIC insurance while offering you the option to reap the potential gains of Bitcoin. Over the past 2 years, you would have earned 2 times the rate of most high-yield savings accounts and 16 times the rate of the national average savings account with Bitcoin interest on cash. Get started, badlandsmedia.tv/river. Move your cash to River today. Start earning a real interest rate with Bitcoin. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. Bitcoin has dumped in the last couple of days to $78,000, which is hilarious given that I was a little bitch several years ago and didn't buy it when it was $3,000 because I was not friends with G-Money yet. So I try to remind myself of that. I also try to remind myself of the time when my brother's best friend asked me if I wanted to buy Bitcoin through him at $500 or a shitcoin at the time. And I chose the shitcoin and it went to 0, as all shitcoins do. So that's my own problem, right? It would have cost me $1,000 to get to 2 Bitcoin at the time. And now it would cost me $150,000. And that's considered a crash in the market. So I think that's just a little bit of perspective right there. Our next sponsor is our good friend, the maniacal, perhaps insane, but but also super bass to Mike Lindell.
I hear every day about the products you all wish MyPillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard MyPillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
All right, Mike Lindell, the absolute savage. I've said before, full disclosure, I prefer the commercial where he interrupts himself to sponsor my shows, but that's not the one we got tonight, is what it is. My wife is talking shit in the chat, something I can bond with my co-host over tonight. His wife is also a rampant shit talker against her husband. It is what it is. This is our cross to bear. I'm gonna start before I bring him in with 2 rants came in. Tom, terrific, $25. Really enjoy the show. You help me understand what's happening, how to interpret what it all means for the cause. Thank you, Tom. And then just SimC, $20. Thanks for not effing around and getting straight to the point. That is not what I do ever. I don't know why you sent that rant to me, but I'll take it. Thank you very much. Please hit the thumbs up button, guys. I know everybody on every platform you watch says that, but it actually matters a huge deal. Like if you're just watching on your laptop or you're on, Zach was telling everybody that even if you're on your Roku or something like that, you can hit down on the little button you're using and you can hit the thumbs up button. It makes a big difference. It gets us on the leaderboard on Monday. That's where a lot of people discover these streams. So appreciate when you guys do that. And thank you for the support. A lot of bullshit over the last week. We're not fucking around tonight. That's why we're going all into the Sovereign Alliance. Everybody's a pussy. There's pussies everywhere. We're fucking sick of it. Everybody is a pussy, okay? Nation states are pussies. Everyone you know is a pussy. Everyone who didn't vote for Trump is a pussy. Your parents are pussies. Your kids are pussies. Your friends are pussies, okay? We're going to get to the bottom of this shit now. We're going to fix everything. We're going to tell you to stop effing around. This is the show. Episode 17, The Narrative. My co-host, Ghost of Base Patrick Henry. What do you think of that, Ghost?
That was the most epic intro I think I could have possibly asked for. Because I agree with everything you just said.
I was going to be nice, but I just stopped. But your wife also talks shit, right? I've heard you make anecdotes about her talking a lot of ish, right?
Prolific shit talker, for sure. And my daughter kind of takes after her too. So you've
said that
at 5, she runs her mouth a little bit at 5, and it's a thing. And she it's like having a carbon copy of my wife. So
right,
yeah.
You can give kids away. I don't think I've only got one. So like when you only have one, like you're like, all right, I got to keep this one. It's super precious, right? I feel like when you've got a few of them, do you start to feel like, listen, if you screw around too much, we have others.
Yeah, it's like you have to keep a rankings like leaderboard, and it's like, you know what, you're dropping in the power rankings. You really need to step up your game.
Right. Absolutely.
Just let everyone know. Just let everyone know the pecking order.
Exactly. That's what tonight's all about, right? I was gonna be like, I was gonna be more professional about this, and then I just decided, screw it, at the last second, right? Because that's what the Sovereign Alliance is all about, and that's the mood I'm in after the last week of Badlands. A lot of pussies out there being bitches. It is what it is. A lot of commenters come in who don't actually watch our shows and roast us anyway. Don't care. You're pussies. So we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, right? If you're watching the show, if you're in the chat, if you're leaving comments, if you're sending Rumble rants in, if you're sending boosts in, we love you. If you're going to come to Badlands, Gart, Plymouth in about a month, we love you. If you're not, then just fuck off, right? Like there's been too much pussyfooting around all this stuff of trying to be professional and trying to be nice to everybody. And listen, we're all adults, right? I'm doing a show, Ghost does shows, other people do shows. Watch the fucking shows that you want to watch and stop being a bitch about the ones you don't want to watch, right? If you want to watch this show, if you like it, you're welcome here. Hope you enjoy the conversation. If you want to watch other shows, watch the other shows. Just stop being a bitch about it. That's it, right? Like when you're watching PBS, you don't call CNN to complain to them about what's going on on the other channel. So that's the mood I'm in, and it's inspired by Donald Trump this past week and by those in his orbit. And that's how I want to lead the show off. We're going to get into the Sovereign Alliance is really our main show. But I think before we get into that, I think this is relevant to the Sovereign Alliance. You know, we see like there's a global reordering that is happening, right? It's obviously in play. And Ghost and I talk about this a lot. We've been talking about this for years. Now the real world, the normie layers of the real world are kind of getting a glimpse of some of the things we've been talking about for quite a long time. And, you know, the main takeaway I have from it, aside from a strategic game theory perspective that we can get into, is honestly that. It's the demeanor of Donald Trump at the advent of these deployments of a global reordering, where he's deployed the deployment, the tariffs, the narratives, all associated with it, right? But what's really impressive to me is how firm he is being on these deployments. And it doesn't feel like they're going to take any backward steps here. So, but I wonder, what do you think about, you know, the last week that we've had, the tariffs? The reason I like Sunday night is it feels like the end of a week and the beginning of a week. And I like looking at, you know, so much is happening lately in the info war. The tariffs are at the center of it. So how have you felt about the deployments from last week and going into this week, about sort of just the demeanor, the deployments, actual narrative, wherever you want to take it?
Well, I do agree. I think like Trump's a very transactional guy. That's like the word, that the buzzword that I think that everyone tries to use to describe him. And I think sometimes when people say that, they mean it in like a condescending way. I don't think that it's always supposed to be complimentary. But one thing he's very cognizant of, because he's talked about it like pre-presidency, post-presidency, while Biden was president, but the markets and like timing the release of news and like why you would time it a certain way in order to impact the markets, and using the stock market as like a metric to measure success, even though like you and I recognize that the stock market is not necessarily tied to the strength of a real strength of an economy. But I do think it's interesting to think of like a week as like a chapter in like Trump's presidency, right? And like he's really good at like changing the news cycle every week with something new and exciting, or trepidation, you know, what have you. Because it hasn't all been just, I mean, I would consider a lot of this stuff all victories, but the rhetoric and the narrative, I feel like there's been like an ebb and flow where there's been a lot of consternation and a lot of like fear about what is he doing now, right? And there's just a lot of dissension in the ranks, and I think that's a feature, not a bug, as you would say. I think that's by design, to kind of shake out some of the weaklings. I don't think that's the right word. I think it's more of like exposing people who are not necessarily acting necessarily in good faith.
Pussies, we call them. You know, and I'm joking around, but I actually,
and I am too. Yeah,
but despite, to your point there, though, you know, despite the fact that we all info war, we dig on our own, we engage with sort of thinkers and researchers in what we call the truth community, the info war. But I really do, and I know Ghost does this as well, I really do engage with a lot of narratives outside of this sphere. I try to engage with a lot of that stuff, right? And this sounds strange, but one of the sort of spheres in the info war that I really like engaging with, because I think it's very signal soaked for the future, is a lot of Tesla bros. Like, there's a whole cottage industry around commentary around Elon Musk, which is one of the reasons he was such a big deal to be in Trump's orbit. But I found myself getting agitated the last few days because a lot of those guys who have kind of de facto found their way into Trumpism, etc., are right now all the type of guys who are going, oh, I don't know, this is irresponsible, all these moves are irresponsible. And, you know, like, I'm joking around when I say everybody's a pussy, right? Even though I'm not. But when you say something like that, people think you're being crass. They think you're being immature. They think you are not understanding the scope of what we're dealing with, the complexity of what we're dealing with. This is ubiquitous. This is terminal, I would use the term, in the financial and economic rhetoric realms, where the people that we're used to getting our information from fancy themselves experts, even if they don't work for places like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, even YouTubers, etc. They fancy themselves experts on the global order. And you just mentioned the term, like the phrase, it's a feature, not a bug. I've really started to think of that in terms of Trump's rhetoric, his rhetorical style that is entering this whole deployment. And what I mean by that is, I think that the reason I love this tariff deployment so much, aside from the actual, is that on a narrative level, I think it's a line in the sand that the United States is drawing. You know, so we're talking about the sovereign alliance tonight, right? I know this first topic is about tariffs, but we're starting with the United States. The United States is the foundation of the sovereign alliance. Ghost and I talk about other countries a lot, right? But it is naive to believe that as the United States goes, the world goes. There is no such thing as a multipolar world order without the United States. Without the United States military on board, without the United States economy on board, Russia and China and India and whatever, they can do whatever they want. It doesn't matter in the long run if the United States is not fully on board with what they're doing. So we start there. And to throw it to you, what I mean by the demeanor is, I think that part of what Trump and Lutnick and Besant and some of the people in the orbit are doing right now is they are simply calling the bluff very publicly of the globalist order and saying, we can do whatever we want to do. And it doesn't matter what your economists say. And it doesn't matter what your politicians and Ursula von der Leyen say. It doesn't matter what Canadian prime ministers who are actually vassals of the British Crown say. It literally doesn't matter. We are going to do whatever we want to do. And you can say whatever you want to say, but that's just the way things are now. And now we have entered a new era in the last week where the rest of the world very literally has to get on board with what we're doing, or they're going to face unimaginable economic consequences. And that's, to me, that's why I think the demeanor is such that it is. They're done playing nice guy. They're done talking about all the statistics. They're just telling you, this is what the United States is doing. You guys can do whatever you want to do, but that's it, right? And that's kind of how I think we talk about warfare and all these different types of warfare. This is a war deployment. This is a war posture that the administration has taken right now. And, I think markets are kind of responding accordingly, but I also think these foreign leaders are also responding accordingly.
Yeah, that's very, very well said. And there's actually a news article I want to share that in a minute that'll speak to all of this. Yeah. If you don't even already have it queued up, but like I said before, like dissension in the ranks, I think is a feature, not a bug, and it's to shake out the weaklings. And really, what I mean by that is, I think this chaos and this confusion, this fog of war that has become even more thick since Trump has come into office is by design. Ultimately, in order to make this multipolar world project work and bring it into fruition, the United States, as we know it, the unipolar United States, which is not the United States that serves the American people, it's the United States that enslaves the American people or has enslaved the American people. It's this parasite that has positioned itself on our face and presents itself to the world as the U.S. government, but really it is a transnational cartel that just as much serves the European oligarchs as the Middle Eastern oligarchs, as the Chinese oligarchs, as the like whatever you want to call it, right? And we kind of have to commit suicide in a way. There has to be like, in order for this new thing to live, this old thing has to be destroyed. And by the way, this old thing is so deeply embedded in our government that a lot of people who are running around with MAGA hats on are part of it. And it's very easy for them to take off the old mask they had on, put on the new mask, which has a MAGA hat attached to it, and call themselves a Trump supporter and wave the flag and like wave the pom-poms and just file right in. And because of the level and scope of influence that they've carried for a long time, they're going to very quickly win over their audience and convince their audience that they were always part of the Trump project and always part of MAGA. And that's a really dangerous place to be, like for us, because these people are not acting in good faith. They can very easily rug pull us and bring us back into the old system once Trump is gone, if we don't really tighten the screws, sharpen the pencils, and figure this thing out. And that's what I think this whole next episode is going to be about. This whole next chapter that we're entering, this phase of the info war. We've all been thinking for a long time that, I mean, myself included, that there was going to be this dramatic moment where things were, the switch was going to flip, and all of a sudden it was going to become so obvious that we were all right this whole time, the people who believe in Trump and supported these ideas that we've all thought about for a while, and the world was just going to buy into it, and everything was going to be like out in the open. And one day that may come to fruition, but I don't think it's going to happen all at once. I certainly don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I think this is going to be like a progressive step-by-step process. The info war has only gotten more intense and more crazy since Trump returned to power. It hasn't gotten less crazy. The temperature hasn't been lowered. The temperature has increased, and the world has only gotten crazier. And I think, again, by design.
Yeah, well said. And I like the way you took that, because in many different ways, there are people, even in our audience, that support us and like what we do, that kind of get put off when we have maybe more of a warlike posture is dramatic, but in the context of the info war, an aggressive posture, even what I took at the start of the show, screwing around, right, calling everybody pussies. I get it. Like, I understand. Some people don't like that. They don't like the aggressive unity. They want unity. They want singing, like sitting in a circle in a field and holding hands. That's not what we believe in at Badlands. And ironically, you know, it goes back to those old meme circles. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, right? Like all those kind of things, right? We're trying to create good times. And nice people don't create good times, right? We need to grow up a little bit and stop. And I know most people in this audience understand this, but stop looking for Donald Trump to be nice. It is absolutely ridiculous. You should be embarrassed if you're one of those people that does I like Donald Trump's policies, but I just wish he was more professional, right? Oh, I just wish that he communicated in X, Y, or Z way. Shut up. The reason Donald Trump seized the zeitgeist is because we've been dealing with a globalist band of potential pedophilic Prussian communists, right? Like, at the very least, we are dealing with a long-term system that has been in place before and especially after the world wars. The world wars in the 19th, 20th century is absolutely where it solidified its power and concentrated that power in the West. Ghost and I, on a power hour, I think a few weeks ago, you talked about the global north, the global south, and you know that's shifted a little bit, as we'll talk about tonight. But generally speaking, that's what we're dealing with. And when you see people, the reason Ghost and I and John does this and Chris does this, probably more than anybody at Badlands or in the info war that you're going to see, the reason we don't really care if we're friends with Tim Pool or if we're friends with Ben Shapiro or all the super based and red-pilled people that you might want to watch to red-pill the normies is because We are actually trying to focus on what we think the problem is, which is what we think that Donald Trump is focusing on, which is why Donald Trump isn't nice about these things. It's why he's direct about these things. And one of my favorite things of the last few days has been Scott Bessent, who is very, from a demeanor perspective, he's very calm. He's very professional. You know, he's a financial guy. But man, his rhetoric, if you just read a transcript of it, you would think it was the most fiery rhetoric going, where he is telling Fox News, Brett Baer, who is also a cuck bitch, by the way, so I hope you don't like him, but asked him, you know, what do you think about what Trump is doing, and what about these other countries? What about our former allies? What about retaliation for the tariffs? And Bessent said, my advice to other countries is to stay back and lay back and let it happen, right? He's saying, if you screw with us, it's only going to get that much worse for you. And the last 8 years or so, that was playing nice. And this is what I think we all have to kind of get on board with, of what Trump's current posture is. Putin and a lot of the figures we're going to talk about tonight. The posture, in my view, of 2016 to 2024, that was us being nice. That was us saying, let's get as many people on board with a new way of thinking, which is really an old sovereign American way of thinking, as we can. Let's kind of build a base. Let's make some arguments, right? We won the arguments. We've won those arguments. There's no argument left, right? So now, when we're in 2025 and Ben Shapiro goes on the biggest podcast on YouTube and says, I'll only get on board with Trump's tariffs if Trump tells me exactly what the plan is. That guy is operating against you.
Yep.
He's not waiting and hedging his bets. He is your enemy. What those people are doing is they are not taking what Trump is communicating de facto face value. The story is the war, as I always say on this show. Trump, Bessent, and Lutnick are openly saying exactly what they're doing, which is we are bringing manufacturing, we are bringing value back to the United States. Foreign countries are no longer going to prosper on the backs of American citizens. This isn't a negotiation. And I think that's my view on it. This is not a negotiation. And even a lot of the alternative media is pretending that this is game theory and this is the art of the deal. And like, yeah, we're seeing Taiwan capitulate. You know why Taiwan capitulated? Because they have nothing to bring to the table. They didn't capitulate, they submitted. This is not a negotiation. Yep. This is a war posture, and we have already won. All that remains to be seen is in what order foreign countries submit to the New World Order. And as we'll talk about tonight, the New World Order is a multipolar world. It's not just the United States. That's what I see as sort of the two paradigms. There's the old order, there's the new one, and that's just my view, Ghost, of why the posture is the way it is. It's direct, at this stage of the game, in a way that maybe it hasn't been before.
Yep. I know. I completely agree. I think that Trump's enemies are not necessarily these countries that he is imposing the tariffs on. They are the oligarchs that are financially benefiting from the tariffs that are in place. And by the way, a lot of those oligarchs happen to have American citizenship. Right. And I would say probably most of them probably do.
Without gold cards even.
Yeah, exactly. Like, meaning there probably are dual citizens of America and another country. And I don't necessarily, when I say that, I'm not being cryptic and suggesting it's all Israel. I'm saying any country, you name the country, and they have spent the money, hired the lawyers, become naturalized citizens of the United States, and have used their influence, or they haven't. I mean, I don't think you have to be a citizen in order to exert influence, but there are certainly benefits that they can have from being a citizen. But a lot of these oligarchs, they're the ones who put the tariffs in place. And Bissett kind of, he said that very directly, I think, in his interview with Tucker, where he said, if the consumer is the one paying the tariffs, then why do these people care so much? And when he said these people, he means the oligarchs. Why do the oligarchs care so much if they're not the ones paying it? And the answer is simple, is because it's evening the playing field so that the little guy can come in and compete on an even playing field with the oligarchs. And they can no longer exploit their slave labor in the far-flung reaches of the world to create cheap products. So, I view this conversation as so important, this concept of the sovereign alliance so important to be talking about right now, because I do think that our strongest allies, as not just Donald Trump's strongest allies, but our strongest allies as the people supporting what Donald Trump personifies. It's not just about Trump. It's about the movement and the idea that he personifies, that he just happens to be the physical manifestation of in this moment. Our strongest allies are not necessarily the entire United States of America, certainly not the oligarchs. It's people like-minded people who don't necessarily share our cultural values. They are not necessarily aligned with us in terms of, the way they want to live their life, but they want the same thing that we want, which is self-governance, self-determination, and ability to fend for yourself and not having to answer to a group of oligarchs, like whether they're Russian oligarchs or Chinese oligarchs or Israeli oligarchs or American oligarchs. And so that's the war that Trump is launching with the whole tariff thing is about going to war with the American, with corporate America. He's going to war with corporate America right now. And those are the people who are screaming at the top of their lungs that he is destroying America. And, the really kind of amusing part is watching, I used the word weaklings earlier, and I don't necessarily mean that as anybody who criticizes Trump or disagrees with what he's doing right now, because I'm seeing a lot of people who I think are very smart and discerning, who are maybe falling into the Keynesian world of looking at the economics, like McGregor, like Napolitano, these people who are the kind of people that Trump picks up the phone and calls and asks for their advice. They're friends with Trump. Trump likes them. Trump trusts them. But they're looking at this, I think, from a very one-dimensional, they're not looking at this from the perspective. And maybe McGregor is just, putting out narratives. I kind of sometimes think that when I hear him speak about this stuff, because he seems to know a lot more than what he says in a given moment. But it's so funny watching people who I respect, like McGregor, analyze not just the tariff stuff, but the geopolitical stuff through their biased lens, but they don't have the framing that we have, which is not just the Q stuff, but the devolution, the sovereign alliance. When you apply those lenses to it, everything that's happening right now makes perfect sense. Share my screen real quick. Let me share this. This article is going to make you laugh because it's almost like we read this article before we had this discussion, but we didn't. This is from.
Oh, that's hilarious.
This is an article that has been published. This is not from the Hindustan Times. This is just being syndicated by them. This is being published in every major outlet. And the headline is Donald Trump has reached peak of, quote, not giving a fuck, says White House official report. And it goes on to say, I want to read the quote because this quote is all over X. It says a White House official told the Washington Post that President Trump has reached the peak of just not giving a fuck anymore in an article that details behind the scenes of Trump's Liberation Day reciprocal tariffs announcement. The Post quoted the White House official familiar with Trump's thinking as saying, bad news stories, doesn't give a fuck. He's going to do what he's going to do. He's going to do what he promised to do on the campaign trail. And I want to say the report quoted a senior White House official as saying, in the first term, everyone thought they were president. However, Trump faced almost no dissent this time around while bringing his trade and tariff overhaul to life. The senior officials involved in helping Trump perform policies around the new tariffs presented him with numerous options and the privilege of the final nod live with the president. And so, the paragraph that I skipped over said Trump's top aides during his first term, which included then Director of National Economic Council Gary Cohn and then Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, were successful in constraining the U.S. president's harsh stance on tariffs. So the suggestion is that people in the first administration were holding Trump back, And this time Trump is not holding back to like exactly mirror what you just said. And that's exactly what I think is happening.
Yeah, and I've written about this quite a bit in various lenses. That's why first principles or ciphers you can apply to multiple lenses, multiple situations. That's why we use them. So one of the ones I talk about the most is the Hegelian dialectic: thesis, synthesis, antithesis. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Problem, reaction, solution is how it's commonly kind of talked about in the InfoWar. When you only talk about it in those terms, you're not quite getting what's going on. I think a lot of the time, problem, reaction, solution works, but I would say that if you're using the problem, reaction, solution theorem, you're actually deploying or thinking about the enemy cipher of how the enemy uses the Hegelian dialectic. How the enemy used the Hegelian dialectic was create a problem, provoke a reaction, guide people toward a pre-engineered solution, right? That's why it became, that's what a false flag is all about, right? 9/11, take down the Twin Towers, provoke the reaction to that, have a boogeyman in the waiting, engineer people toward a solution, which is a forever war in the Middle East that makes a very small number of people a lot of money. That's not what the Hegelian dialectic actually means. The Hegelian dialectic is thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which basically means you present a thesis, which is to say an argument. That argument comes into conflict with an antithesis, an anti-argument. The synthesis between the argument and the counter to the argument creates the synthesis. It creates an understanding on the back end there. So what you just laid out, and it's so funny looking at the quotes about the first Trump term, etc. I personally believe that Trump and the patriots behind him knew that they were going to have the first term, somebody, not them, was going to have the second term, and they were going to come back for the third term. One of my macro theories has been the reason behind that is that they have been basically repurposing the Hegelian dialectic writ large in the form of administrations. So the first administration was the thesis. Donald Trump comes into the American zeitgeist, which is also the global zeitgeist, and lays forth the argument for nationalism, onshoring of production, tariffs, etc., right? He laid forth all these arguments: sovereignty, multipolarity. The second term, the Biden term, is the counter-argument to everything that Trump laid forth. How did the American people feel about the counter-argument to what Trump laid forth? Like, we all know how the American people felt about that. So when Ghost says, and when that article says, Trump has a posture right now of not giving an F in the third term, that's because he knows, and the patriots know, that the collective mind understand the argument is already over. It's over. Trump laid out the argument from 2016 to 20. The other side comes in with the counter from 2020 to 2024, and now it's over. We're not debating anymore. We're not trying to wake up the normies anymore, which is why like Chris Paul pushes back against this so firmly. If you're a normie, you're a retard, right? Like, you're gonna get on board with the New World Order because the New World Order is just gonna make sense.
Yep.
Normies got on board with the old world order because they're idiots.
Yep.
Stop worrying about them. They're going to follow you into the golden age because the golden age is going to be awesome.
Yep.
So this is why Trump doesn't care. This is why Elon Musk doesn't care. This is why Besant and Lutnick don't care about what they're saying. They don't care about the feelings that are being hurt about what they're saying. They don't, this is a key point, they don't care about unity because they know that they have the winning argument and that on a long enough timeline, the argument is going to win. which is why they don't need to convince people of the argument. They just need to implement it and watch it take form.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think if I recall correctly, because we've had obviously many conversations on different shows. I think the last time I came on here, we did Trumpomania, and I think we talked about how the War of Stories was not necessarily about waking up the normies. The War of Stories was about running an operation against the enemy that had been left alive. And I think the metaphor I used was using Stannis from Game of Thrones, and like him limping after the battle. Like his army had been defeated, but he was still left alive, and he was still able to kill like individual soldiers who were running up to him trying to kill him. He was still dangerous, but he wasn't about to like be able to like defeat it's like the enemy has been left alive so that this enemy can be toyed with the way that a cat toys with a mouse, because so many of these things could have happened during the first term, but would they have been as effective as a long-term solution? And I don't think that is necessarily a reflection of like waking up the normies, because honestly, the normies are sheep. We know that.
They don't care. They don't matter.
They don't care. They're going to go along with whatever happens. It's like if China wins and enslaves America, guess what? They're all going to dress up like Chinese and start speaking Mandarin, because that's going to be the most convenient thing for them to do to have the easiest life. Like they're going to do that like that. Same thing if Europe were to conquer America, and we all like they'd start speaking German. If Africa were to conquer America, they'd start speaking African. If Mexico were to conquer America, they're going to start speaking Spanish, because that's the easiest way to go along to get along. And unfortunately, that's just the reality. We live in an age of cowards where there is a much larger proportion of the population are betas. Like they are people who will submit more easily, because over the past century, a number of wars have been fought that have slaughtered the strong men of the world. And that's just a fact. And men across the world have been taken out. They weren't there to raise their sons. They weren't there to raise their kids, to teach them how to be strong men. And as a result, our pool, so to speak, of men across the whole world has been weakened. And look where it's led to. Like look what it's led us to. So I do think that that's part of it. But I went and asked ChatGPT. I think this is worth reading. I asked what tariffs did Trump impose during this first term? Because like the question is, well, why didn't he do this during the first term, right? Well, he kind of did, but to that article's point, he held back. Like this is what it says. So it says the tariffs on China, that was the big one, the tariff war with China. The initial round in July of 2018, a 25% tariff on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods. Not that many, to be honest. The subsequent round, it was expanded later to cover over $360 billion in Chinese imports. China retaliated with tariffs on the U.S., soybeans, autos, etc. And that's kind of the decoupling thing that we've talked about before. They then signed what was called the Phase 1 trade deal in January of 2020. Trump has talked about this before, where he says, we signed this really big trade deal that I almost don't care about anymore, because weeks later, COVID happened. And, the official narrative is that it came from China. So I was so mad at China that, I don't even really care about the trade deal that we signed that was going to revolutionize our economy. We did steel and aluminum tariffs, a 25%. This is March 2018, 25% tariff on steel, 10% tariff on aluminum. Mostly affected Canada and Mexico. And then the last one was tariffs on the EU. 2019, $7.5 billion worth of goods, like EU goods, mostly wine, cheese, and aircraft parts. So it's like, and then they responded by putting tariffs on Harley Davidson motorcycles and bourbon. And so, that's it. Those were the tariffs that were put in place. And then I think it looks like there were tariffs put on all washing machines and solar panels. That's it. And then aside from that, it says that Trump renegotiated trade agreements using tariffs as a threat. And so he threatened Mexico and Canada with tariffs, and that got us to renegotiate NAFTA into the USMCA. And then he threatened tariffs against South Korea, and that got us to renegotiate KORUS, which is like the Korean U.S. trade agreement. He also threatened Japan, India, Vietnam, and Brazil with tariffs, and briefly applied a few tariffs, and then that got trade agreements with them. when you compare what I just read to what he did on Tuesday, like that is literally a drop in the bucket. You're talking about effectively all he did was he did a 25% tariff on a segment of Chinese goods. And then that got expanded tenfold over the course of like a year or two. And look at what it did to our economy. That was July of 2018. Yeah. And then 2019, we had the best year that America's ever had on record in terms of like economic output. And that was just a drop in the bucket. He turns around and he did that on steroids to almost to everybody. There are a few countries I want to talk about that he didn't do it to, which I think are signal for sovereign alliance. But imagine how much better like that is going to impact our like the result of that on our economy. I think General Quast during your show with him, which was awesome, he talked about like a V8 engine, like only running on 2 cylinders and versus running on all 8 cylinders. I would say that like we were running on 3 cylinders in 2019. Now we're going to start running on all 8. And the difference is going to be revolutionary.
Right. And I want to talk about China. So tonight we're going to hit, there are more people involved. There are more countries involved. But what Ghost and I are going to talk about tonight is 3 countries in particular outside of the U.S., Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia. So we're going to kind of just give some back and forth thoughts on each one of those. Sort of the way I want to do this is basically past, present, future in the context of the Sovereign Alliance, in the context of the globalist regime. But before we move into the first of those, I did want to address, when you said, you talked about the sort of the weakening of the global order of men, right? Of leaders. And we're talking about leadership posture. We're talking about strength versus weakness, etc. And, it's kind of interesting because I talk about this sometimes sort of behind the scenes. I was long before I was a writer or an InfoWar person. But once upon a time, I was a professional tiger trainer for a very brief period of time. I'm very interested in animals, specifically predators. And one of the interesting things to me when you study last week on Story Hour, we did The Gray with Liam Neeson, which is a lot about wolf packs, has wolf pack mentality in it. So I think human beings think about themselves in a way that is unrealistic. In other words, it is not common for there to be a high number of strong men, otherwise known as strong leaders, at any given time. So I agree with you in part. I agree with you that the world wars were meant to take strong men, the sort of foundations of Western society, put them in a meat grinder, grind them up, and that's absolutely true. I totally agree with that. I would also say, though, that at any point in human history, it's never a large number of strong human beings that are guiding the course of human history. It's usually a small number of really dialed in dudes that are figuring stuff out and that have the power projection behind them, hard and soft, to get those things implemented. Mm-hmm. And the way I see this is, I bring up animals, wolf packs, lion prides is a good way to think about this. Tigers in India, in China. If you ever look into demographic information of lions and tigers, which I know everybody does, I mean, obviously that's just a thing we all do, you are never going to see a certain number of male tigers above a certain threshold, no matter how healthy the tiger population becomes. Why? Because they're going to kill each other. Because what they do is they are going to expand their territories until they come into conflict with each other. They're going to fight, and the weak ones are going to die. So the only amendment I would give to what you're saying is that in the course of kind of strength in the animal kingdom and in the world, it's true that when there are more strong men, when there are more strong nations, there is a stronger mesh. But there are not more strong people. That's my opinion. So in other words, in a really healthy tiger population, there are not more tigers than when there's a weak tiger population. It's just that the tigers that are dominant are much stronger when there's a healthy population. So it sort of reaches a critical mass. And to apply this to what we're seeing right now, I think that's part of, to bring this back to kind of Trump's demeanor and some of the other figures we're going to talk about. The reason that they are adopting this take no prisoners sort of demeanor is I think that they laid out the choice to know will be yours kind of rhetoric already. They're like, hey, listen, here are the arguments. We're going to make the arguments for the first time in decades, if not generations, in the West. Here are the arguments of sovereignty versus globalism. Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, etc., right? The enemy comes in and makes the counter arguments. If you're still a normie at the end of that super public argument versus counter argument, thesis versus antithesis stage, that's okay, right? Like, you're just another tiger in the jungle. You're just another wolf, right? But you don't get to make the decisions for the future. And that's one of the reasons that it's not to be a dick. It's to say that you need to stop worrying about the normies, not because you don't care about them.
Yeah. It's
that they have no energy, they have no desire to guide the future.
Yes.
And
exactly.
you do.
That is exactly it. That's exactly
it. So one of the things that I have a wolf, right? I have a working line German Shepherd. He's a Russian wolf blood. Like he was a big learning experience for me of training him from a first principles basis. And what you will learn of training a dog like that is that a dog wants an alpha. They're not upset to have an alpha to submit to. They want an alpha. If a dog does not have an alpha, they feel extremely anxious in every situation because they think that all of the pressure of every situation is coming onto them, right? Yep. That's why if somebody enters your house and your dog bites them, guess what? That means you're not an alpha. That means your husband is not the alpha. That means that your dog didn't know what the situation was. It bit your neighbor because it thinks that it is the alpha. It is responsible for establishing the domain that you are in, right? And when we go into the future, Donald Trump is an alpha. The reason he doesn't give a shit about what everybody else wants to say at this stage of the game is because the arguments have all been laid out. The American people voted, real, fake, everywhere in between. We all know that the American people lent their mandate to Donald Trump to lead the country. That means the counter argument is done. There's no negotiating with the losing position. The losing position is at the back of the pack. The alpha's at the front of the pack. He decides where the pack goes. And we're with him, right? So, that's I just wanted to put it in different terms because think you can.
That's a really good way to put it. I think it's a
and one more just point on it is, and I wanna open it up with Russia is who I want to start with. When we talk about some of these countries tonight and these leaders, I think you can apply that refrain to a lot of how these leaders are operating. They're just kind of doing the thing.
Yep.
And there's a lot of arguments against what they're doing. There's a lot of very smart people with podcasts who have opinions of what they're doing. Ursula von der Leyen is holding press conferences about what they're doing. And guess what? They're just doing it because they have won the argument already. And they have the mandate of their respective peoples to do the thing. So now we're entering a stage that I think is very exciting, where we're just kind of going to start doing the stuff. And then we're going to see how the pieces fall.
So well said. I love the like where you took it with the analogy. I'd like to just add on to that very, very briefly. It's almost kind of like a soldier in an army acting like out of his own volition as opposed to following orders because he doesn't know what to do, and he's like panics and starts shooting people when he's supposed to hold his ground, hold his fire, and all of a sudden that can lead to some really, really bad events. Right? He could start a war by shooting somebody he's not supposed to be shooting because he panics because he's scared because he's not in control, because he doesn't know who the leader is, right? It's like bad leadership could lead to that moment. I think it's a very, very astute observation to observe that it like I think submitting is the wrong word, but recognizing a leader and following a leader is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. I think it's a sign of weakness is feeling like you have to project, pretend to be strong when you are weak, right? Like Sun Tzu says, and you have a lot of people running around doing that right now in this day and age. And we live in an age of total domestication. To G Money's point, my friends who I love dearly, who have been there for me in very, very hard times, and I would have their back likewise, do not care about any of this. They're totally uninvested. And it's because they're very comfortable. They are in no threat of losing their job. If they do lose their job, they'll go find another one because they have that ability. They're very comfortable. They would rather sit around and watch sports. And, most of them probably did vote for Donald Trump at this point. They do support Trump. But, they're still worried at the end of the day about what people think about them. And so running out there and vocally supporting Trump and vocally supporting his policies, there may be a handful of them that would do that. But most of them are too worried about what other people are going to say about them. To me, that's just such a backwards way of being at this point, because it's no longer about politics. It's no longer about Republican and Democrat. It's about being right. It's about doing the right thing and following what you know in your heart is right. And if you haven't reached that point yet, then you just haven't reflected enough on the whole situation.
Absolutely. And again, going back to even The Gray, there's a lot of commentary in that movie, not verbally, but just sort of in the context of what an alpha is doing. What is the role of an alpha? And it's, believe it or not, no matter how much we've been gaslit, the alpha's job is not to seek consensus in the pack. Okay? The alpha's job is to do the thing that is the best for the pack, and to do it, to get enough consensus to not be attacked for what they're doing. So there's obviously a role for consensus. You need some sort of consensus. Chris Paul often says, from a negative lens, consent through compliance is what the COVID era was all about, right? The same thing can be turned into the positive direction. The people you're talking about, I have a lot of my friends, a lot of my normie friends are similar. Even in New England, a lot of my normie friends are Trump supporting guys who, most of them were already conservative, but some of them used to be liberal like I was, and have kind of come along. They've got families, they've got wives and families. You either live long enough to become a Trump supporter or you die a little bitch. That's kind of like, right? That's the way it goes, right? Once you have an actual mortgage and kids and a wife to take care of, you become a Trump supporter because you're not retarded anymore. But to your point, they're not digging into the first principles. They're not digging into these they don't care about these arguments. They're just going along to get along. That's fine. Like, you need omegas. You need you need people in a country who care about the country, and they care about their wife. They care about their home. They care about their children, right? Like, that's why I want to massage this rhetoric a bit to say, yeah, we take a hard stance. We take a hard line stance sometimes, but we're trying to be out in the front. We're trying to ward off the predators, right? We're trying to see the threats, assess the threats in the future and in the past, and see where we're going. That's not most of the country. Most of the country, the bedrock of the country, they just want to be Americans. They just want to go to work. They just want to love their wives, love their children, be able to work hard, be able to keep what they work for, etc., right? And I think a lot of those people are gravitating toward Trump and by extension sovereignty, which is one of the big themes tonight. But they don't have to be militant in the info war. You don't have to convince them to join the info war. But my only point about stop waiting for the normies, and Chris says this a lot, it's not to belittle them. It's to say, guys, they're not going to join the team. They're not going to join the militia, right? You're the militia. So guess what? That means that you probably are going to have a disproportional role in deciding where we go, in deciding the systems that we establish, which is why we can be so combative, aggressive, firm about rhetoric that seeks to mollify people, that seeks to get them to reduce their rhetoric. Now, we're always peaceful. We're very against glowies. We're very against that kind of rhetoric. There's a fine line there.
Of course.
But in terms of sovereign directed action, this is what I think the Trump era is all about. This is what I think a lot of these various leaders we discussed tonight are all about. It's about, listen, you need to, if you care about this stuff, you need to take a forward stance. You need to move forward. You don't worry about what's behind you. You worry about what's in front of you. Because if you create that kind of wake line, everyone's going to fall in behind you. And I think we're seeing that. And to toss it to you, well, go ahead if you want to respond to that.
It doesn't make them evil. It doesn't make them evil. It doesn't make them bad. And you should not hate them for being that way. You should just recognize that they're not participants, like they're not combatants in the info battle space, like the info war battle space. So therefore, they are like in the Bible, like the strong protect the meek. They're the meek. So it's like they're the thing that you're protecting. So you run out in front of them and you protect them and you act on their behalf. And but you don't turn around and turn your back to the enemy and sit there and cater to them and say, okay, so what should we do next? Like, you tell me, like, do you think we should go this way or that way? It's like they're the meek. They don't want to participate. They want to go do something else. So you have to go run forward and take the initiative. And that's what I think Chris is getting at when he talks about the party of false decorum and defecting from it and ignoring it. I think that's a big part of it. So yeah, I totally agree. And I think like a way to transition to the Russia stuff. If you want to share my screen, I can just show some examples of this whole tariff thing starting to pay dividends, because again, we've listened to many days now. It's been 5 days of people wringing their hands saying how Trump's going to destroy the U.S. economy. And this is going to be the end of the world. And this is going to be like 1929 all over again. Right. So this is from yesterday. India is considering cutting tariffs on more than half of U.S. imports worth $23 billion in response to Trump's new tariff policy. Oh, look, it's working. Vietnam, which has a 90% tariff on U.S. goods. It's a communist country. Vietnam is offering to eliminate all tariffs on U.S. goods to avoid President Trump's tariffs. We now have, this is Kirill Dmitriev. He is the U.S. special, or he's the Russian special envoy, like economic envoy, who was in D.C. this week, meeting with Bissett, meeting with Trump, working out like all the deals. He was speaking on television to all the different news outlets and giving like his Russia's position, speaking on behalf of Putin. And he is retweeting this BRICS thing saying India seeks to negotiate a new trade deal with the U.S. to avoid President Trump's tariffs. And he says, wise and effective approach. You want to bet that this guy's picking up the phone and calling all these people and being like, hey, man, it's time to come to the table and capitulate. It's time to play games.
Before you go on, Ghost.
Yep.
Speaking of Dmitriev, hold on one second. So I was writing an article including this in it. So for anybody who doesn't know, as Ghost said, this guy's one of the ones. He's part of the Russian envoy negotiating about the Ukraine conflict in the United States, right? He says, quote, President Trump's tariff strategy reflects a growing shift toward economic sovereignty and national interest. By prioritizing domestic industry and correcting structural trade imbalances, the U.S. sets a precedent for self-reliant growth and sustainable job creation. So this is the Russian ambassador in Washington, D.C. right now, talking about how this is a wise and sovereign-minded approach to the future, which is why I wanted to start with Russia of their kind of position in this alliance.
Yes, exactly. And if you want to throw this back up, I have like three more, and then we can go to Russia. But so here is the president of Zimbabwe announcing that they're going to suspend all tariffs now on the U.S. You then have the president of the Congo of the Republic. This is something that's been teased for a while now, but him and Trump have now, according to sources, have begun their negotiation. He has offered, I've been covering this on the Badlands News Brief and on Badlands Daily, but you have these proxy terrorist groups coming in from Rwanda, seizing control of the cities where they process the rare earth minerals. The rare earth minerals in the DRC are worth a reported estimated $24 trillion, which is a lot of money. So they want these back. Remember, these are the ones that Trump, with Executive Order 13818, seized or froze in 2017, and then they were stripped away from the oligarchs. So this guy, the new president who became president in 2018 in the Congo, has reached out to Trump and said, I will, if you help me resolve this situation with these terrorist groups, I will give you, the United States, some of these resources. Y'all can have exclusive access to the vast cobalt, lithium, uranium, among others. And I can tell you that 50% of the world's cobalt comes from this place, and 75% of the world's coltan, which is a metal that I had never even heard of before, but it's crucial for all electronics. Your phone, your laptop, all of it requires this very rare metal called coltan, and 75% of the world's supply comes from the DRC. And so he's offering all that now to Trump, and the guy who is leading the negotiation is Mossad Boulos, who is Tiffany Trump's father-in-law. And he's been appointed as the ambassador to the DRC. Like Trump appointed him as that. So he also owns a company that provides vehicles to like the Sahel region of Africa. And if you've been following my writing, that is Burkina Faso. This is like this guy right here, Ibrahim Traore, is like Putin has taken him under his wing. He has helped him stand up to the French and throw the French out, and literally seize control of his country. He's the youngest leader in the world, 36 years old. And Trump did not impose any tariffs on Burkina Faso. This guy has rejected money from every single person who's offered him money, including MBS. MBS offered him a bunch of money, and he said, no, I don't want anybody's money because then you own me if you give me your money. He is definitely a badass. And then I think that's it that I have for now. But I'm sure since I've driven home from the country, from my in-laws' house, there's probably been more. But
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to start with Russia. So we're talking about the Sovereign Alliance tonight. Obviously, we could go 8 hours if we wanted to, but we're going to try to kind of keep it relatively surface level. And I'm sort of making this up as I go for a reason, because I think instead of trying to dig into all these super specifics, I think, that the point of this show is the narrative. And I think, another way to think about this is the macro. And I think it's interesting to try to explain to people why we feel that each of the countries we're going to talk about tonight are members of what we've dubbed the Sovereign Alliance. And I sort of think about it from a temporal lens. So I'll just kind of start to kick it off. We're going to talk about 3 countries. We're going to talk about Russia. We're going to talk about China and Saudi Arabia. Those are not the only people that we think have a role to play in the future of multipolarity. Ghost and I are pretty positive, and we think that we're going into a golden age. Everybody's going to be good. Some countries are going to experience a little more turbulence, I think, en route to the new world order that is going to be less Orwellian than the old world order. I wanted to start with Russia because for a few reasons. It's obviously what started me kind of in the info war from a public perspective. I wrote the Righteous Russia series. The reason that I felt called to write that, I suppose, is I felt like even people in the info war at the time, this is 2021, late 2021, were not applying some of the hints we had from both Trump and, if you followed the Q drops, the suggestions that Vladimir Putin might not be who we thought he was, that he might be working with Donald Trump. To me, when the fear-mongering began about Ukraine and the Donbass, even when I was a liberal, I had been kind of Russia-pilled during 2014, 15, 16, the issues in Crimea and the Donbass, understanding that there was a color revolution going on over there that was not only perpetuated by the Obama regime, but that was cheer-led by them publicly, very publicly. They were all too happy to take credit for it. So that sort of started to Russia pill me a little bit. I've said before on the show, I used to train with Russians. So in order for us to get along, we had to kind of, understand each other a little bit. And they thought it was batshit crazy that I was a liberal American, and I thought it was crazy that they were Putin guys. But we ended up becoming friends and sort of figured some shit out through then. But the way I would put this to set Russia up, past, present, and future, sovereign alliance. What is the sovereign alliance? On a very macro lens, the Q drops laid it out as, are Trump, Putin, and Xi working together to combat a globalist deep state regime, right? Very easy baseline. I think that's great that that was in the drops because it kind of got people thinking, right? The way I would distill this further is to say, the sovereign alliance are a collection of leaders and countries that are aligned not in the vision for their countries, but against a vision that has been thrust upon them. So I believe that the sovereign alliance is less a battle for something and more a battle against something.
Yes.
They are against globalism, collectivism, unipolarity. They are against what we have been brainwashed into calling the New World Order, and if you want to get away from that rhetoric, the rules-based international order. That is the order of the Western regime. We are the bad guys. We are not the only bad guys throughout history. We're just the current bad guys. The Western regime have been the current bad guys, I would say, going back to Vietnam. I'm not saying we weren't good or bad before that, but to me, the coming out party of the Western globalist regime was Vietnam. It was when we just decided we're going to start wars in other countries. We already have the world global standing from a financial perspective and from a moral perspective after World War II. And we're going to milk that for everything it's worth. And the global system didn't sour on the Western rules-based order, on the allies, as we've been told they were, right? Isn't it funny how they named the board game Axis and Allies? Like, who am I supposed to cheer for, Ghost? Should I be the Allies or should I be the Axis? Which are the good ones?
The
right?
axis of evil is how they're sometimes described, like in history.
Should I play as the
Literally.
axis of evil or the allies of goodness? I wonder. But, to kind of put a bow on this, I see this as Russia has always occupied a very unique position where they should be our closest allies. Culturally, religiously, they should be our closest allies. Ethnically, you're not supposed to say that, but fuck you. Ethnically, there are a lot of ties to the United States and Russia. There are a lot of ties between Europe and Russia. There's such a thing as white dudes and non-white dudes. That's not what any of this is about, but it just stands to reason that ancient empires were kind of built on these things regionally, right? We have a lot of ties.
Yep.
So there's been an attempt over a century, more than a century.
2 centuries, I'd say, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 2 centuries to split, and you can talk about this, to split the US and Russia, so that's the past. The present, I think, is a reordering, a shifting that's going on, where the US and Russia are orbiting each other in the central narrative, and I think for the first time we're moving toward, in the public narrative, them having more in common than against each other. And I believe that in the future, the US and Russia are going to be public, very public allies. And I actually think that the reason I start with them is that China and Saudi Arabia, these other countries we'll talk about, are important. But I think from a mass psychological perspective, the story of Western reconciliation with Russia is going to engender the most catharsis and the most powerful kind of step into the new multipolar world than the other stuff is. That's kind of why I start with them, and that's why I think that the relationship between Trump and Putin, the relationship between the US and Russia, is really, to me, kind of the lead-in and the bedrock of the emergent sovereign alliance, with a lot of the other things, pieces that fall into place around it.
Yeah. 100%. The comment on the ethnic stuff is actually interesting because Russia is the most naturally ethnically diverse country in the world. Always has been, and part of that is just because of the vast geographic expanse that it has. You have Mongolian Russians, you have Eastern Asian Russians, you have Slavic Russians, you have
Muslim Russians.
Yeah, you have Scandinavian Russians, which like Vikings, and all of this was a factor in World War One. They had to actually break all the units up because, and you had guys in World War One fighting in different uniforms based on their cultural heritage. They were all speaking different languages. They were all using different weapons because that was before everything was, fully codified and unified, and there was more of a standard. And then, of course, the Soviets came in or the Bolsheviks came in, and while they were all in the front line, murdered the ruling family. The guys in the front line had to turn around. This is the White Army. That's what they're called. Not an ethnic epithet, but just there was the Red Army and the White Army. They turned around and run back to Moscow, and they spend about a year in a civil war with them. Can't break the lines, and those guys had been at war for 10 years at that point, and they start like infighting. They break up. They go home. But literally, you had just everything from East Asians to Vikings to Slavics, all fighting side by side against these Bolsheviks. Couldn't break the lines, and that was really the end of the Russian Empire and the start of the Soviet Union. And it's very interesting the historical connection, because the whole reason that the U.S. Revolution, American Revolution, succeeded is because the Russian Navy kept the European trade channels, maritime trade channels open. The British wanted to destroy every single U.S. ship that tried to pass through there, and it was the Russian Navy. It was Catherine the Great who said, "Nope, we are going to protect them, and if you attack them, you will be dealing with us." And there's no way that the American didn't have a navy. There was a conscious decision to make the British come on land and fight us on land because we didn't have a navy. So,
we had the USS Constitution in Boston. That was about it.
We had the USS Constitution. And
we had one boat.
Yeah. And
it did pretty well.
And there's an awesome story about, this guy, John Paul, who was a Scotsman who becomes a smuggler and ends up killing a guy who tries to lead a mutiny against him, and then later finds out that guy was actually the son of a very rich lord. So then the British Army comes after him. He has to hide out in North Carolina. This family takes him in, and then he's very, very sick. He almost gets caught. The father of the family ends up being a delegate in the Continental Congress, and he leverages that connection to get a commission in the U.S. Navy, because he's like, these people they owed me nothing and they took me in. Adopts the family's last name, which is Jones, becomes John Paul Jones, the father of the U.S. Navy, and then demands a commission on these 13 frigates that they're building. And they're like, maybe. He says, I want to lead a armada. I want to lead the armada, the 13 ships, against the British. I want to go into Whitehaven, which is where I first started sailing out of when I was 13 years old. And I want to destroy their shipyards. That's where they build all of their ships for the British Navy. And they're like, absolutely not. You know what? Put this guy in a little dinghy, send him up to Canada, and just get him out of the way. He goes up there and he captures 16 British ships using on like a little sloop. And basically, Benjamin Franklin is like, you got to give this guy a commission. Gives him a commission, says, all right, follow me. Let's go across the Atlantic Ocean. And they say, nope, absolutely not. And he says, all right, you know what? By myself. Leads the ship by himself, goes to Britain, and burns down Whitehaven. Almost gets mutinied by his guys because he won't let them loot and plunder all the houses there. But then the British show up. He sails circles around these 5 ships. The guys are so stunned. This guy's like Han Solo, like he's like the greatest pilot ever. They're like, how the hell did you do this? Pulls up next to one of them, locks next to him, gets in a big fight. So much blood that people are slipping on the deck. The captain basically says, you need to surrender now. All your guys are dying. And that's when he pulls a grenade out, throws it, says the famous line, I've not yet begun to fight, throws the grenade in their battery, blows up the ship. There's like 1,000 people watching on the White Cliffs of Dover. They watch this ship blow up, and then he sails into the Netherlands, flying a flag nobody had ever seen before. They say, that's not a real flag, therefore you're a pirate. Arrest him. They're going to hang him. And then Benjamin Franklin shows up from France and says, no, this guy's my homie. He's my guy. After the American Revolution, Catherine the Great makes him a rear admiral in the Russian Navy because, again, we had this close alliance with Russia.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So John Paul Jones actually ends up living the rest of his life in Russia and then later dies in Paris as like kind of this disgraced figure.
That's what's going to happen to me, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. It's actually, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt, I want to say, who went and got his body, brought it back to America, and then buried him. He's buried underwater at Annapolis. But he was for 200. I think they just gave him a pardon like in 2015. You have to fact check me. But for 240 years, he was considered a terrorist and a pirate. And literally, like in the late 1700s, parents would tell stories about the pirate terrorist John Paul Jones coming to Whitehaven and burning it to the ground. And that's how he was viewed. He wasn't pardoned for 240 years. And it just goes to show, it's like, even back then, the framing and label of terrorist was used against good men who were fighting for a just cause. And it just goes to show, if he had listened to the guys in the Continental Congress who told him he was insane, who said, absolutely not, do not go do that, we probably wouldn't have won the American Revolution, because after he does that, other ship captains are like, wait a minute, he did what? They then sail across the ocean, and then they're like launching raids against the British. So he inspired like this whole uprising against the British Navy, not only from Americans, but from other like colonies around the world. And it's just so important to understand like this relationship between Russia and America, that I think Putin is trying to like bring back and trying to like cultivate.
Yeah, well said. And I love the history analogs. And, it's on a few different levels. I mean, it starts to show you how far back the history goes, which you point out, but it also shows you, to your other point, how far back the story goes. And the story that has dominated the zeitgeist, especially in the West, has been one of antagonism between the United States and Russia. And that was when I really started deep diving. I had said, I started diving into the Maidan coup and everything in 2014-15, but not into Russian history. I was well versed on the history of Russian martial arts and knew a lot of guys, from Russia, etc. Ironically, the guys I trained with were not... That also confused me and was a red pill that took time to sort of fully metastasize. So that's probably the wrong word I shouldn't have used, but it took a while for that to sink in, because the Russians that I trained with, the trainer was straight up Russian, like Moscow Russian, but the fighters that I competed with were Dagestani. So they were a mix of Dagestanis and Chechens, and those guys are Muslims. Which is, that was a big red pill to me. And I know I've mentioned it in various ways on these shows. But just think of this, guys. From like even a lot of you watching the show that, maybe you're on board with the idea of Trump and Putin working together. But you really, it would behoove you, and I bet it would be really encouraging for you to look into the recent 20, 30-year history of Russia and to go back into pre-1920 Russia and to kind of research a lot of the stuff even before, after what Ghost is talking about. Because in the 90s and early 2000s, Dagestan, Chechnya was its own sort of region. Like they were in the Caucasus Mountains. Easy analog to this might be like they're sort of the in-between zone, the transition from the Middle East to Russia is the Caucasus. This mountainous region. My favorite Russian writer, I happened to have a concentration in Russian literature when I was in university because I really gravitated toward Russian literature. This was before I trained with them. Anna Karenina is a famous one, but Lermontov was my favorite Russian writer, and most of his writings were about the Caucasus Mountains and the wars that were going on at the time. You had a hero of our time. If anybody wants to read any Russian literature, I would highly suggest A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov. But, that's neither here nor there. All of which is to say, when you start to understand that Putin, somehow this extremist... You want me to share this? This is a little map.
Yeah, share the screen just to give people some context.
Yeah, go ahead and zoom in a bit if you can.
I can't, but here's the Black Sea. Here's the Sea of Azov. Ukraine is right up here in the upper left.
Yeah.
Turkey's right here. Here's Iran. So you're in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. That's the region known as the Caucasus Mountains.
Yep.
So
always been very contentious. A lot of campaigns going on in there. I mean, Ghost probably knows more about that going into the past than I do. But just in the 90s and 2000s, I've said before that the trainer there, he told me one time when I finally asked him why he had a portrait of Vladimir Putin hanging in the gym, he was showing me old albums from the 90s when he was in the Russian Spetsnaz. And he was talking about how, they were fighting against Al-Qaeda in the 90s. And he said that Al-Qaeda was CIA funded. So he told me this as a liberal in 2010, 11, 12, that kind of range. Then after I trained with those guys, 2014 rolls around and we get the Maidan coup. And funny enough, all the rhetoric I start hearing out of the Obama regime and out of Putin, counter to it, maps perfectly onto what my Russian trainer was talking about. And what was so astounding to me was the Obama regime was taking credit for the CIA enacting regime change. It wasn't like they were trying to pretend that wasn't happening. They were saying it was happening. And then to go back to the Caucasus point and the Dagestan and Chechnya, these regions, you have to understand, these regions hated everybody. And they really hated Russians. Like, they did not consider themselves Russian until Vladimir Putin, when he came to power, he concentrated on purging the Caucasus regions of extremist Muslim terrorism that the Kremlin claimed was being funded by Western and Israeli interests at the time, right? And then what happened? Now Dagestan and Chechnya, the Chechens and the Dagestanis, like, I know that they often get conflated together, but they do consider themselves separate. But they're both Muslim Caucasus peoples. You want to look at one, they look Russian and Middle Eastern. Khabib Nurmagomedov is a Dagestani. They're also the toughest dudes in the world. And they don't believe that there's much of a difference between sparring and fighting full contact. So I would recommend that if you're going to spar with one of them, you just pack your lunch and understand what you're in for. But if you'll recall, this might jog some of your memories, a couple of years ago now, when the Wagner group was supposedly marching on Moscow, the Chechens were the ones who intercepted them. Now, to Westerners, that was like, well, who cares? Whatever. Some random Cyrillic word was stopping this other Cyrillic word from taking Moscow. No, the Muslims were defending Putin against the Russians, right? Now, I think a lot of that's bullshit. But either way, this is where the Chechens and the Dagestanis are at right now. And that made me go down a rabbit hole of the history of Vladimir Putin and when he came into power and how he came into power and what his goals were when he came into power. And when you look at that, in my personal opinion, the Putin template in the 90s and early 2000s is more or less the precursor to the Xi Jinping template, the Donald Trump template, and the Mohammed bin Salman template. They're all different, right? They've got different flavors, but you've got a Russian sovereign nationalist who comes in to a nation and a political scene that is dominated by the globalist oligarch class, the corporatists, the Bolsheviks, and he basically puts together an anti-corruption campaign built on Russian nationalism. He purges extremism from the ranks. He mobilizes the Russian military against terrorism, real terrorism, not Bush era terrorism. And then 10, 20 years later, we saw Xi Jinping do it. 5 years later, we saw Mohammed bin Salman do it. And a few years later, we see Donald Trump doing it. So that's why I like starting with Russia, because I genuinely believe that if they weren't the only ones, if they weren't the ones who started it from a planning perspective, I do genuinely believe that they were the ones who started it from an actual perspective of saying enough is enough. We're going to come in here after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and we're not letting the oligarchs take over. We're not letting the globalists take over. We're taking our country. And the Russians adopted a posture in the 90s and 2000s of F all of you, East and West. We're going to do what's best for the Russians. And now all of a sudden that's become very popular in many different countries in the interim.
Yeah, and so and you mentioned, of course, Israel being involved, and the historical context there is that Russia was close allies with Nasser, who was the president of Egypt in the mid-20th century, and older people may recall Nasser. He got a really bad rap in the Western media, but Matt Arrett has educated me a lot on him, and he's definitely falls into that category of being like branded like an evil communist when really he was just trying to pursue the national sovereign interest of his country, it would seem. And the history between Egypt and Russia actually goes back to 1771, Catherine the Great, once again, helping the Egyptians and the Syrians rebel against the Ottomans. The British were with the Ottomans, and the Russians were backing the Syrians and the Egyptians. And what do we see today? We see Russia with military bases in Syria. They just signed a deal with Sudan, which is just south of Egypt, to build the very first Russian military base on the African continent, if you can believe that. That's insane to me that they haven't had one up until now, but I think construction on that just began or is about to begin. They just finalized it in January. But you have a lot of history here that's going back to the American Revolution era that's now coming full circle, where old alliances are that I think have a lot of foundation in like the banking world, because the banking goes back to London, and before that it was Venice. We're just right there. You're talking 1,000 years of banking, and that's also where espionage really started, corporate espionage, and it was all the bankers hiring lawyers to go engage in espionage. It only became a state-funded practice like in the 19th century, and really the 20th century, but. And when I say espionage, really what you're talking about is regime change. Yeah. And whether you're talking about corporate regime change or political regime change, it's all the same. It's about power. And that's where all this stuff connects back to. And so when you talk about the rise of Putin, it's a fascinating story. You're going to come on Book of Trump, and we're actually going to walk through that, because that's it's a crazy story when you actually understand.
It's weird. Happened. Just as a tiny preview there, something I was shocked by that might intrigue some of you guys. Vladimir Putin was a relative unknown in Russia when he came into power, which is kind of interesting in light of he's infamous to us, right? But even before the era of Trump, Vladimir Putin was infamous. In the 90s, he was just some guy.
Yep.
And Boris Yeltsin, Anton Yeltsin, moved heaven and earth to get him in there. So just strange. I mean, strange analogs.
Yeah. And the whole conflict that happened in the 90s after the Soviet Union collapses is known as the Aluminum Wars. And it was basically all of these old KGB guys. And Putin gets the bad rap for being a KGB guy. What else was there to do in Soviet Russia? It's like you go work for the government, or you go shovel pig shit in the field. It's like which one are you going to go do? So all these old like KGB officers basically are fighting for control of the resources in where? Ukraine. And Ukraine has a lot of rare earth minerals, as we've learned about. And so control of the aluminum is what really becomes like the crux of it all. And the guy who wins that is, what's his name? He's connected to Russiagate. It'll come back to me in a minute. But the oligarch that Putin has turned on. But Putin went after a lot of these guys in the 90s. Like like when he comes in, like or rather, once he comes into power in the 2000s, goes after these guys. And you know who else is at the heart of that whole thing that I've recently learned about? Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father.
Yep.
He was the one teaching these guys how to launder their money after they consolidated these resources into their hands. And you get a bunch of thugs basically using violence and using mafia tactics to consolidate control of resources after an empire that's collapsed. They parlay with Moscow to make Ukraine like a different country, and Ukraine becomes like this proxy separate state. And it's really weird, man. And basically we're now watching all of that be resolved because it never was resolved in 1992.
Yep. I want to play a little video that I've probably played a year ago or something. It comes up every now and again, just as a catch-all for some of this. And this was a few years ago. I will say, yes, people in chat pointing out some of the bots. And yes, I am aware of the timing of when the bots came over here. We are very well aware of that. Some of you are probably aware of that. And yeah, this is what I'm talking about. The shit that goes on in this world, we are very well aware of. This is not our first rodeo. This will not be our last rodeo. So I was keeping an eye on chat. I was aware of when the bots came over at exactly what time. And yes, it is meaningful that they came over at that time. But anyway, just ignore them. I've muted them. It is what it is. So we've got here a classic clip of Vladimir Putin taking Oleg Deripaska to task here. That's a name that is probably familiar with many of you who are well versed in the devolution theory and you know, the Sovereign Alliance and all this kind of stuff. Go ahead, Ghost.
By the way, that's the guy whose name I couldn't remember.
Okay,
so,
this is who you're talking about? That's perfect.
Oleg Deripaska is the guy who's considered the winner of the aluminum wars. Mm-hmm. And then what he ends up doing is he ends up combining his company with the aluminum company from Glencore to create the United Company Rusal. Yep. And so Rusal is this company that is then, I think, is connected, I believe, to Hunter Biden and like connected to a lot of this crap that we're learning about with like Joe Biden and all the nonsense going on there. So,
yep, this is just an interesting one. This is a microcosm of the Putin era. So enjoy.
Vladimir Putin strode into town.
Почему раньше здесь не было людей, которые способны были...
Have you seen this, Ghost?
Yes, I have. This is a great. This is a fantastic video. Please play it.
Принимать решения. Почему здесь-то забегали все как тараканы перед самым моим приездом?
Unlike Medvedev, Putin confronted the factory owners.
Считаю, что вы сделали заложниками своих амбиций, непрофессионализма, а может быть просто и тривиальной жадности. Тысячи людей. Это абсолютно недопустимо. Если собственники договориться между собой не смогут, то единый комплекс все равно будет восстановлен. В том или в другом виде, то это будет сделано без вас.
He demanded the owners, including billionaire Oleg Deripaska, sign an undertaking to restart the factories.
Вы подписали этот договор? Да. Олег Владимирович подписал? Что я не вижу вашей подписи? Идите, подпишите. Идите ко мне. Да, договор.
That's Deripaska.
Classic Putin.
So there's a lot going on in that clip, but you know, a lot of the Western media, even at the time, said this was a humiliation ritual. They're absolutely right. of Vladimir Putin toward the oligarch class represented by Deripaska. I want to hit a couple of things on Russia. We could do whole shows on it before we move on.
And we will,
to China.
but not tonight.
Yeah. But just a couple more things I want to hit. One of them is relevant to that clip. So basically, one of the things I was really intrigued by during my Russia research was the 90s. I knew nothing about Russia in the 90s. And what I found so interesting was in the wake of the coming down of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, one would think, oh, we got this rise of Russian nationalism and sovereignty. That's not what happened. What happened was the oligarchs who were Soviets, who were Bolsheviks, as Ghost mentioned earlier, they seized control and filled the power vacuum left over by the Soviet Union. So essentially, what you had was, you essentially had all of the downsides of the USSR with none of the positives. Now, I'm not a defender of the USSR, but I'm just saying, as the common saying goes, the trains ran on time, right? Like, that's something that the communists are going to give you. That's not something the oligarchs are going to give you because they don't have a systemic control system. But it was all the same people. It was the same millionaires, billionaires that were in charge, that filled the power vacuum. This is the class of people that Putin came in and really did away with. And he did it in shockingly identical fashion to what Trump has been doing in the West. And this is why I think sometimes people get a little confused when people like us, we freak out in a positive way when we see like Apple announcing a $500 billion investment in U.S. infrastructure. Guys, what's going on there is the same thing that you saw in that clip. When Apple announces a $500 billion investment in the United States, they're telling you that this American company is not an American company. They are a globalist oligarch company that is now being forced to bend the knee to Donald Trump and come back to the United States and give jobs to American people. That's what's going on in that clip between Vladimir Putin and Oleg Deripaska, is that the Soviet and Bolshevik factory owners in the 80s and 90s basically had two choices when Putin came to power. You hire Russians and you invest in Russian infrastructure, or you better start running. And this is one of the other analogs I would make or allusions is when you see a lot of these headlines that are less common now, but in the aftermath of the Ukrainian situation of such and such oligarch, Russian oligarch, has sanctions on them, the first move you should make is to see what that oligarch's standing is in Russia. Because oftentimes those oligarchs are in international waters specifically because they are not allowed to return to Russia. So this is one of those language coding things where the Western media talks about Russian oligarchs, knowing that the American people are going to think Russian when they hear that. And yet Putin is an enemy of these people. So it's all to set you up, whatever your response is to that. But to me, one of the big storylines here that we're disentangling in the Western mind, we've seen this within Badlands hosts themselves of being disentangled, is the difference between a Russian and a Soviet.
Yeah.
And I think that to me, that is one of the major sort of narrative bombs that are being diffused and disarmed, in the current time period. And I think it's a tricky one to disarm.
Yeah, I would encourage people to go listen to, I think it's the most recent episode of Napolitano's show with McGregor, where McGregor, I think it's from his past week, where McGregor actually talks about the origins of the Soviets and gets into that history. So it's an interesting, it's like a 30-minute interview. So it's a fast little interview. But yes, you're 100% right. It would be the equivalent of the media telling Russian people that American oligarchs like Bill Gates are friends, and George Soros are friends with Donald Trump. Like that would be the equivalent of presenting that. It's a very, very reductive, like oversimplistic, silly comparison. Just like using identity politics in just like a very inverse way. And like I said, Russia is naturally the most eclectic, diverse nation in the world because of its size, and America, because of the nature of how it was founded, is also a very naturally eclectic, diverse nation as well. And that's kind of the similarity that we share.
Yeah, well said. And the last point I wanted to hit on Russia, of course, it's going to be a short show, right? Is their role in the Sovereign Alliance. And we're going to try to do this with the next two countries as well. So we kind of talked about some of their history, some of what might intrigue you to look into. Again, we're not going to cover everything tonight, guys. We're just trying to give you some things of what started tickling us about these specific players and some rabbit holes that you should go down. And you're going to find some awesome shit. In fact, we've got plenty of time tonight. One of the things I want to do with the rants and everything on this show is make this an engagement with the community. We really appreciate when you guys send in the rants. Obviously, they help us out. They help fund the network, right? But we can make this a back and forth. So if you have a question on something that we're talking about for me or Ghost, or just something that you want to bring to our attention or want us to look into or mention, then send a rant in. We're going to get to that at the last part of the show and engage with you guys. So that's really, again, a lot of you use the rants to support us, but you can also use it to engage with us and have a conversation of what we're doing. So that's what I want to do here. That's the last act of the show. To set this up, what is the role of Russia in the Sovereign Alliance that we theorize? My opinion is one of the refrains that I use often is power is power. I often use a scene from Game of Thrones. I've played it a few times on this show, so I'll not do it tonight. But I think Trump encapsulates this. I think that's going on when it comes to the tariff, the trade war, etc. But I think that Russia in the last few years has shown the global mind the power of sovereignty. And the way I think they've done this is twofold. Number one, they went into the Donbass and said they were going to do this. They then did it, right? Number two, the Western globalist hegemon, including the United States, hit them with sanctions. They hit them with soft power projection as a reaction to what Russia did. And Russian GDP went up. So I personally believe that Russia's role in the Sovereign Alliance has been to demonstrate the power of sovereignty and, ironically, the power of actual power projection in the face of globalist soft power projection. So that's kind of how I see their role emerging. And I think that it was dependent on Donald Trump and the devolution operation, because what we wanted to avoid was a war with Russia. Americans wanted to avoid it. Russia wanted to avoid it. But I think Russia's being used on the world stage. Before Donald Trump, I genuinely believe that Vladimir Putin is actually the world leader that has been most effective at demonstrating the weakness of the European globalist class, in the current zeitgeist. But I wonder what you think about what their kind of role is.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating. I mean, I've spent so much time thinking about that question, about why this would be and what and how this whole thing would play out. And the thing that I go back to, and maybe I should have said this sooner. Well, first of all, Deripaska, for those just to bring everything full circle, he's the guy who set up Paul Manafort in 2017.
Right.
So he's the one who is connected to Russiagate and basically tried to entrap Donald Trump. So it's hilarious that he's in that video with Putin just being completely humiliated. You probably would know this being an author, but I think it's called an ensemble story. Is that what it's called? Where you bring in characters that are eclectic, diverse. I think the best example is from literature would be The Lord of the Rings, right? Where you have this cast of characters that don't get along, that wouldn't otherwise be working together, cooperating, but they have a common purpose, they have a common enemy, and they're trying to they're, like you said earlier, they're not fighting for something together. They're fighting against something, and they all
Right.
are personally affected by this thing. And in the Lord of the Rings, it would be Sauron and Mordor, right? So
Yeah, they're each representative of their own sovereign peoples. To your point, and there's so much signal in Lord of the Rings, but one of them is that the Legolas is not just Legolas; he's representing Elvendom. Gimli is representing the dwarves. They are polar opposites in terms of culture, and they're the easiest example of at the end of that story they are reconciled. And it's not just the two of them that are reconciled, it's their peoples that are reconciling through them, which is why I'm often using the term cognitive ciphers when it applies to Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Trump doesn't control the United States, but he represents it. And same thing with Putin.
Yeah, no, and the like the friction between those two characters, like drives the story. It makes it more interesting, but it also brings about like the resolution, and when they put aside their differences and work together, because like in those moments, that's the compelling part of the story, right? That's what makes the story so great. And so it's so compelling, by the way, that Game of Thrones copied it and did like a episode where they went north of the wall, which had a big delivery because it was like 7 seasons of these characters all now being on screen side by side, right? But that's a very, very I feel like compelling just way of storytelling. And I think when I look at the Sovereign Alliance, that's how I see it. I see it as like an ensemble of interested parties who wouldn't necessarily be aligned, because I think General Quasta was correct in the conversation y'all had where he says that it's a dangerous world out there, and if you don't have your wits about you, you can find yourself in some serious trouble. It doesn't mean just because we're all talking to everybody that it's all rainbows and sunshine, and that we don't need to be worried about things. Of course we do. It's human nature. And I think the big problem with just analysis in general these days is that the human nature is completely ignored, and we just feed way into our ideology and like how we view politics and how we view people and like the identities of people, and like that seems to drive things instead of this is human nature. Human nature responds to incentives. Here are the incentives. If you shift the incentive structure, human nature will shift with it. I mean, that's kind of humans 101, right? And so getting back to the question, like what's Russia's role in it? I mean, if we're going to play into the devolution theory, I view it like Donald Trump sent the call out. Like he made it very clear when he was president, this is what we're doing. He became this symbol because of his celebrity going into the position. Everyone universally understood what he was. Everyone understood his capability, his ability to get things done. And because of the way the media treated him, and I think in hindsight, they probably regret that because they understand how much of a mistake it was. They made him a martyr. I think that a lot of these leaders around the world understood this guy is hated by the same people who basically control me or hate me or want to destroy me, depending on what kind of leader you are. And the more I've dug into this, what I've come to realize is 20 years ago, there was another sovereign alliance. There was a proto-sovereign alliance, which Putin was a part of. And it was Assad. It was, what the hell was his name? Iraq, man.
Saddam Hussein?
Hussein, yeah. I don't know why my brain's not working. Gaddafi, Hussein, Assad, all those people who were standing up to this stuff. Kim Jong-un's father to an extent, but I mean, he was kind of a puppet. But what happened to every single one of them? They all got overthrown. And they're trying to do that to Putin, of course.
Yeah. They couldn't quite get Russia. Russia's been the crown jewel. I think that's a great point you bring up. That's a good way to frame it, that was like a mini version of the Sovereign Alliance, but they just didn't have the power projection. And this is why the devolution theory is so important to the Sovereign Alliance, is because Vladimir Putin couldn't have gone into the Donbass and done what he did without the sign-off of Donald Trump. He had to know that the United States military was muzzled during this time, because Hillary Clinton said in her own words, in various ways, what they were looking for was the excuse to kick off a war between the United States and Russia. And the reason that they couldn't just enact this CIA-led regime change against Putin is because Russia was too powerful. And more so, you mentioned the KGB, Russia's statecraft and spycraft was too powerful and too advanced. And man, it is hard to get a guy like Putin when he is a spy. And he knows how the game is played.
That's a good point.
You know, like, and I had said in my Righteous Russia series, which you guys should check out after the show this week, when I first started turning on to Putin was ironically when CNN started putting documentaries out about him. And in Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown, they were trying to pump up his political opposition. And then after the show aired, they were talking about how his political opposition was poisoned and he was found in a river next to the Kremlin, right? Like all these color revolution attempts. And but to your point, Gaddafi, Hussein, and they went after Assad.
Yep.
We came, we saw, he died. That's what the globalist regime wanted these people to know.
Yeah. And so I think like a big part of the whole Russia story in this, if you want to share my screen, is Africa. And just real quick, it's very easy to illustrate this with this visual. Here is Africa in the 1880s. I mentioned the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had a series of wars with Russia that lasted from the late 1700s up till World War I. And so in 1880, this green up here is the Ottoman Empire. The British are down here in pink. By 1913, of course, the Ottoman Empire ceases to exist, and you get replaced with this. There's a country that is noticeably missing from this list when you think about the European powers, and that's Russia. So you have France and Egypt basically dominating the entire continent, except for Belgium is here in the Congo. And without Russia, like Russia is just not even on the continent, and the rest of the European powers all have at least something there. And when you consider the vast resources that this continent represents and the riches and how it's been exploited, and then you look at these maps right here, this is about as fascinating as it gets. These are reports from the Atlantic Council from 2023. On the right, these are military agreements that have been signed between Russia and these respective African countries. The blue, any country in blue, is a recently signed from 2017 on, which is when Trump is in office, agreement between between Russia and the African country. Anything that has a year on it with a red explosion, that is a military coup. And so all the countries that have these explosions, you'll notice, were either 2000 or after. Really 2021, because Mali had one in 2020 and another one in 2021. But all these other ones had it in 2021, 2022, 2023. Burkina Faso being the one that I just mentioned. The orange is military arms transfers from Russia to these countries. And then so you'll notice on this entire thing, the only military base is the one that I mentioned in Sudan. At that point, it was just a project. It's now been finalized as of January. This is the Wagner Group in Africa. Mm-hmm. And so you'll like, here's the legend. Light gray is a disinformation campaign by the Russian military. Dark gray is a disinformation campaign by the Wagner Group. And wherever you see the diagonal lines, that's the Russian military and the Wagner Group doing disinformation campaigns together. Anywhere you see the pink soldier, that is the Wagner Group on the ground training the locals to fight the French, basically. Yeah. But the European powers that have been raping and pillaging these countries for the past, 150, 200 years. Yeah. And so basically
the great irony is that Russia is going to be like known as one of the great liberators of Africa in the emergent century.
That's exactly
and China as well.
That's exactly right. And what's really fascinating is the green stars is the deputy defense minister from Russia. All of his visits just in the year 2023. The orange circles is Sergei Lavrov. All of his visits in 2022 and 2023. And then I actually have a separate map that I made myself that this is right here. So the countries in red, that's the same guy, the different guy, deputy foreign minister, just in June of 2024. And then the blue countries are Sergei Lavrov, just in June of 2024. So in 1 month, the foreign minister and the deputy foreign minister from Russia visited all these countries in the same month. And those are all the countries right now that are like the hot spots in Russia that are in like open rebellion against like the globalist regime. So the way I see it, like going back to your wolf analogy at the beginning, is that I think Trump kind of became the alpha. He let the pack know that he's in charge and that this is real. And this isn't going to be like last time 20 years ago where you're going to be left out in the cold. If you stand up, you're going to get your head chopped off. And then he steps off stage. Like if we're going to tie devolution into this, he steps off stage. Putin steps in as like I guess you call him like the sergeant of like the sergeant or the field commander. And he's the one who's actually giving them the kinetic power to do this projection and to throw off the chains and actually gain their sovereignty. And then now Trump is coming back as like the leader in America. And I do think we're going to get this convergence where, like I said earlier, Trump is doing this thing where he's putting on the neocon cape and being George Bush 2.0 and kind of leading people by the nose, like the neocons by the nose, towards like this war rhetoric, like war with Iran, war with China, war with everybody. I think the wall they're going to run into is going to be Putin. It's going to be when Trump and Putin stand side by side, and these idiots who have been like following this rhetoric, like, yeah, we're going to war with Iran. And all of a sudden, like Trump and Putin are going to be like, no, we're not going to war with Iran. Like, we're actually going to have peace. These people are going to be basically standing on the table demanding war when Trump and Putin are sitting there being like, no, we're actually going to have peace. Like, who are like the people of the world going to side with you? Like obviously they're going to go with peace.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's one of the pincer moves that the globalist establishment is being put in, is that they're having to, warmonger in the open while Putin and Trump peacemonger in the open. And I totally agree. And one of the things I'd written in many of my writings is Russia has been the kinetic power projection arm of the Sovereign Alliance, and that Donald Trump stepped off the stage, as you put it, so that Putin could forward this action. And what it showed everybody is that without the backing of the United States military, the European Union has no power. No power. Not a little bit of power, not like medium amount of power, no power when it comes to enforcement against Russia. Because guess what? They would have done it. And now, if you want to come back at me and say France has a legit military, sure. Supposedly they do, right? Here's the thing. Obviously, they don't believe they have the mandate of the French people to use that military against the Russians. So either way, they don't have the power, and Putin knows they don't have the power. So totally agree with that. I want to move, before this becomes a 8-hour show.
Yeah.
I want to move to China, then we'll hit Saudi Arabia. I want to do two things with each that we just kind of did with Russia. And I'll start with you on this one. So, the second thing is going to be, what do we think their role is in the emergent sovereign alliance? But before we get to that, I think kind of what we ended up doing with Russia there is sort of what intrigued each of us about this specific country, why we first started thinking of them in the context of the sovereign alliance. And I wonder your thoughts on China, because I think that they're a huge player in the sovereign alliance. And but I wonder kind of how much you've looked into them, past, present, and what you think, what kind of got you looking into them maybe with a different lens than maybe you used to.
Certainly my fascination with the sovereign alliance has always been going back to really like Saudi Arabia, and we'll get to Saudi Arabia in a minute. So I'll table that for now. But China's probably the one that I've looked into the least. However, obviously, like the signal between Trump and Xi during the first administration was the strongest, because he wasn't really allowed to have a relationship with Putin because of the whole Russiagate scandal. He had to basically put distance between himself and Putin. I think, they leaned into that. That's like a really good example of them drafting off the momentum of what the deep state was doing. That allowed Putin to kind of go do his own thing, like the thing I just laid out in Africa. In Africa, tens of trillions of dollars of wealth just in the Congo, like I said before. So you extrapolate that the entire continent, you're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars. Like, I mean, who knows? But I mean, it is a gold mine, literally. China is interesting because Matt Ehret has, I mean, that's like his area of expertise. He has educated me a lot over the past year and a half about China. And I'm actually going to have him on the Book of Trump to do the same thing with Xi. Like, so I'll do a chapter on Xi Jinping, and he will walk us through that. What I understand from what he's told me, the system in China is that they actually, despite what we think of when we think of communism, they are a meritocracy. And if you're going to be, for example, the head of the agriculture, like if you're going to be the minister of agriculture in America, that's just given to somebody as like a favor. That's like, oh, okay, well, you're somebody's friend or you're somebody's son or you're a donor or whatever. So you get to be the minister of agriculture. There, you have to have an expertise in agriculture. So Xi, when he was a young man, he was on that track to be like, I think at some point he became the minister of agriculture. He started by going around to farms in China and repairing tractors. That was literally his job, was he had to understand how to fix a tractor. He had to understand how to plow a field. He had to understand how to run a farm. That was literally his background. And then that led to him eventually becoming the minister of agriculture and then the president of China. So that, to me, like learning that from Matt, I was like, holy crap, like that makes so much more sense than, and obviously I think I would assume, you know, the communism thing lends itself to that, where you can be like, all right, here's your assignment, here's your job, this is your career. Like you're going to spend your life doing this, and it's going to lead to you becoming the minister of agriculture if you do your job well. If you don't, it'll be somebody else doing it. Obviously, like in America, people have freedom in the West, and they can choose to leave that and go do something else, and that makes it a little more difficult to get somebody with that kind of expertise in the position, unless, of course, you have a system that cultivates lots of experts, which we don't really have anymore because we've gotten away from that and we go more towards the fiat system. Different conversation. But the China thing is really interesting because they have the mandate from heaven. And for those who don't understand like Eastern culture, and this is like, we'll get more into this with Saudi Arabia, but in Russia, the Middle East, China, I'm not really sure about Africa, but certainly in the East, they have like the wolf pack mentality where strong men want a strong leader and they look for the guy who's the most capable. They look for the guy who they think is going to give them the highest chance of success. And then all the strong men who are in their own right alphas give that guy the power to be the leader. And the moment that they lose faith in him, that you are not our best shot at success, you are removed from power and somebody else is elevated. And that's how the oligarchies work there. Whether you're talking about the tribes of Arabia or you're talking about the mandate from heaven in China, that's how it works. And it's very different from the West. In the West, we used to have the divine right of kings, that God chose you to be king and you were born into it. And then eventually we went to, democracy, but it's just very, very different. And it speaks to that whole wolf pack mentality of strength, recognizing strength and being strong enough to say, I'm not the best chance that we have of success. You're the best chance we have of success. And that's my understanding of how it works, at least in the Middle East. I can't 100% say that in China, but it's really interesting, Xi's background story, because it seems like he went after people the same way Putin went after people. And whether he buys into the CCP storyline as we've been told, I'm not so certain. Whether we've been told the full truth, I'm also not certain of either. I mean, that's something that's far more convoluted and a much darker, deeper rabbit hole of unknowns than the Russia story, which is a much easier one for me to understand.
Right. Yeah. Well said. What's interesting, another little bit of the Wolfpack mentality thing. One of the interesting things is that we think in such binaries. Excuse me. Hold on. Almost sneezed, but didn't. Fought it off. That's my power level was enough to fight that sneeze off. There are multiple alphas in a wolf pack. This is something that most people do not recognize because that's not how we think of alphas. We think of the one alpha. there is usually an alpha. That's not always the strongest wolf. But kind of to what Ghost was saying there, there are alphas will recognize the strength and leadership qualities in another alpha and are okay deferring leadership to that alpha, to Ghost's point, if it gets the whole pack to a better place. But one of the things that keeps that alpha competent is the threat of the other alphas orbiting him, knowing that if you step out of line or if you start to slip a little bit, there are other alphas in the pack that are willing to step up and take that leadership role. So that's kind of one of those misnomers about wolf packs. Like there's this one alpha, then everybody else is a little bitch that follows him. It's not the way it goes. Like to be an alpha wolf, there's a few that are always kind of looking at you. Now they're going to be your best allies when it comes to another wolf pack. They're going to be your right-hand men. But as soon as they think that they might be better off, that the pack might be better off with them, they might start to take things into their own hands. With Xi, for me, this blew my mind. I dug into Russia for a few years. 2022 was when I really dug into Xi and China. And the Tigers and Flies campaign absolutely blew my mind. So Xi Jinping really came into power, not just politically, but in the Chinese zeitgeist, with a deployment called the Tigers and Flies campaign. And what this was, according to the Xi administration, an anti-corruption purge of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, this resulted in over 14,000 arrests and incarcerations of CCP party members. Now, if you're part of the Western oligarch class, you're going to paint this as globalist, communist, dictatorial takeover. If you believe in the Sovereign Alliance and you understand the power of counter signals and reverse indicators, you're going to understand that many of these oligarchs that were wrapped up in this anti-corruption purge are globalists. They are communists. They are the very people that Sovereign Alliance members stand opposed to. Xi Jinping's father, some of you may know, was excommunicated from the Chinese Communist Party for what they considered dangerous rhetoric. Many of us might recognize that rhetoric as being sovereign and or nationalist rhetoric. So Xi Jinping's father was excommunicated very literally and incarcerated by the CCP. So, like when you want to look at how far back this stuff goes. Then a few other things I found interesting about Xi Jinping. Let me see if I can find it here. I wrote an article that not a lot of people read because it was too long. But people usually know me for the Righteous Russia series, but I also aggregated my China writings into Doomed Dynasty. If you want to check that out, burningbright.substack.com. Xi Jinping has some interesting history to him. He created a Politburo Standing Committee. Formerly independent heads of state reported to him on economic issues, National Security Commission. He transferred the responsibilities of internal security to himself, meaning he heads his own equivalent of the Secret Service. Now, isn't it interesting that Xi Jinping didn't want the Chinese Communist Party Secret Service to protect him? He wanted his own Secret Service, so that's interesting. He holds his hold over the central command structure of the People's Liberation Army is direct. Tai Ming-chung observed no other Chinese Communist Party leader, not even Mao Zedong, has controlled the military to the same extent Xi does today. For the first time ever, he created a commander-in-chief position in the PLA Joint Battle Command. Chinese presidents are not typically commanders-in-chief. Xi Jinping is the commander-in-chief of the People's Liberation Army, which is a new army, newish army. The People's Armed Police, which used to report to the CCP, now report to Xi personally. Who does this remind you of? Xi has sole authority over the people's... Go ahead.
Worth noting that, the commander-in-chief position in America was created in 1775 by John Adams.
Bostonian.
Yeah, and the office of the president was created in 1789, 14 years later with the ratification of the Constitution. So the commander-in-chief position existed 14 years before the office of the presidency, and there is a difference between those two things.
Yep. So I think there's some analogs here to Trump. 2013 to 17, he waged a highly public war against CCP corruption. He officially punished 1.4 million party members, including 100 generals and admirals. Okay. His goal was to restore public respect for the party. It was a matter of, quote, survival or extinction, is how he put this. He expanded the Discipline Commission to seek out corruption and levy punishment against government-adjacent officials, including doctors, professors, and executives. Now think of the COVID era and the expert class that you were just talking about. So he went against them. I thought this was interesting. The Journal of Democracy, this is an NGO, by the way, probably got defunded recently. I haven't looked into it, but this was a 2022 dig. Journal of Democracy, quote, who let senior CCP figures govern their own policy domains and build their own patronage networks? Xi Jinping has been systematically demolishing the organizational basis for patronage networks controlled by others. That's another way of saying he purged the connections between legacy CCP members and the current regime. Completely cut them off.
Wow.
He removed 6 party leaders for alleged coup attempts, including security head Zhao Yongkang, Bo Zilai, Hu aide Ling Zhihua, 3 generals here. According to the China Media Project, the recruitment of new party members now includes much stricter loyalty parameters and official pledges and oaths to the People's China. Whereas local councils have historically appointed judges, Xi transferred that responsibility to internal affairs, meaning he and his loyalists have installed all Chinese judges since 2013. Very similar to Donald Trump, right? And then one more here. According to the Journal of Democracy, under former President Hu, if you guys don't know, Hu Jintao is the man that was very infamously removed from the Congress, from the National Congress, wherein Xi Jinping was installed into his 5th term, unprecedented 5th term, former president. Hu Jintao is the man who signed a lot of the deals with Bill Clinton. Hu Jintao is a man I strongly disagree with Matt Ehret's reading of, because I think his beneficial or optimistic opinions of China go back a lot further than mine. But Hu Jintao was in bed with the Clinton administration and the Obama administration. Xi Jinping is not. So in my view, the sovereign China is a new thing, 2013 and on. It is not before that, even though there might have been some things here. But they said, quote, collective leadership was a system with a division of responsibilities among individual leaders in an effort to provide arbitrary decision-making by a single top leader, to prevent arbitrary decision-making by a single top leader. So, in other words, if you guys look up, and again, if you want to check any of this stuff out, go to my Substack, Doom Dynasty, look it up. But if you look at the globalist media, their framing of Xi Jinping was that he is a dictator in waiting, and he is undoing all of the effort of Hu Jintao and the Chinese leaders of the 90s, 80s, and 70s who were installing this CCP systematized control structure. And all of the rhetoric coming out of the globalist media is nearly identical to the rhetoric levied against Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and the thing about Hu and Clinton is fascinating. China's ascent into the World Trade Organization was finalized, and I just looked it up, December 2001. That process was begun by Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, in 1971, when he was the first U.S. official to visit China. And that was also the year that he directed his protege, Klaus Schwab, to go start something called the World Economic Forum. And then 2 years later, his other protege, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Trilateral Commission, Trilateral Commission is three, one branch being Europe, one branch being the US, the other branch being Japan. And it's basically about controlling those three regions and the trade in those three regions. And then you think about how China has been exploited and become a slave caste among other places. But really, China is the one that has become very obvious, I think, to American audiences. And it makes a lot of sense that, like, I tend to agree with you that, like, the positive reading of China, I don't think goes back as far as maybe Matt may think. Him and I haven't had like the in-depth conversation, but I think we probably will.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna pretend I know all the ways he frames that. I just mean for me personally, I think this is a pretty new thing. Doesn't mean that there weren't some things going on that pointed toward this,
like groundwork being laid potentially.
Yeah,
Potentially. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, when you consider that they just entered the WTO in 2001, and then everything that's happened in America over the past 24 years ever since, obviously the decline of the American manufacturing core goes back probably to at least the 70s, if not sooner. I mean, if not earlier, but it's really taken off over the past, like, post 9/11, right? So it's like all these things just align too perfectly for it to just all be coincidental. I mean, it's obviously an orchestrated plan. And that's where I think the Sovereign Alliance comes in, because without the counterbalance of, or like the pushback, the counterinsurgency rather, this system takes over everything. The tentacles are everywhere, and it's being run through the State Department. It's being run through the U.S. government, but it's also being run through Europe. It's also being run through Japan. It's also being run through China, because I think the term that Steve Bannon uses is elite merger rather than elite capture, which is like the historical model of war. Like, you win a war and then the elites capture the elites and make them submit. It's elite merger. Like, they're going to intermingle and basically like intermarry, so to speak, and say, hey, let's work together to enslave both of our populations. And that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's well said. And I for me briefly, if we move on to what do we think China's role in the Sovereign Alliance is? For me, I think this is very relevant to what's going on right now with the tariff deployments. I've got a somewhat unpopular theory. During the COVID era, I believe that, I don't know who started it. I don't know, I'm not pretending I know how far that stuff went and who controlled what. All I'm telling you is the COVID era allowed us to start decoupling from the Chinese economy. And contrary to popular Western belief, Xi Jinping is fully in favor of decoupling from the Western economy. So something you're going to see a lot of rhetoric happening around currently and moving forward with Trump's trade war is going to be about China. It's going to be the U.S. versus China. I think the strongest game of kayfabe is going to be Trump and Xi. I think that's going to continue. And I believe what they are both doing is they are mutually decoupling the U.S. and Chinese economies, because while Americans understand the advantage of decoupling from China, meaning we're not dependent on foreign imports, we have national security, we have healthcare, we have onshoring of U.S. manufacturing. There's so many advantages that we understand as Americans. But Americans often think like, oh, we made China rich. No, we didn't actually. We made Chinese oligarchs rich. Same thing we were talking about with the Soviet Union. The Chinese people were fucked because they're all making iPhones for 5 cents an hour in gigafactories owned by Chinese oligarchs. And who is the Tigers and Flies campaign targeting? Those people, in my opinion. That's who it was targeting. So when Trump launched his trade war against China in his first term, how did Xi Jinping respond? He started putting tariffs on American companies in China. He started kicking out American companies from China. So when you see Apple coming back to the United States, it's not just that they're an American company returning home. They're being disincentivized by Xi Jinping of operating in China. And I think that the trade war is allowing narrative cover for Donald Trump to bring companies back and for Xi to kick companies out, which is one of the reasons you're seeing a massive rise in the last 10 years, but specifically in the last 5 years, of Chinese nationalism. According to various metrics, The most nationalist country in the world right now is China. Now, Western globalist media will convince you that that means they're a bunch of brainwashed communist retards. But what I think is actually going on is Xi Jinping is seen by a lot of the Chinese people as the Donald Trump of China. And he is kicking out Western globalist corporations that have essentially been enslaving the Chinese population while destroying any chance of Chinese companies to compete with each other. And this is the trickiest thing to disentangle because a lot of the stuff that Trump and company talk about China is true. They have been stealing American intellectual property. They have been stealing American manufacturing. But you have to consider what Chris Paul talks about of the good twin, evil twin dynamic. Which China are they talking about? Are they talking about Xi Jinping's vision for multipolarity and Chinese sovereignty and nationalism going forward? Or are they talking about Hu Jintao's vision of Clinton-era Chinese oligarchy and mass globalist production? I would say the latter. And that's why I think you're going to continue to see this decoupling between the U.S. and China accelerate in the months and years ahead.
That is very, very well said and very interesting. I think that to get a little more specific and to relate this to what I just went through with Russia, like we'll just look at Africa real quick and then we can talk about the trade routes. It seems to me like Russia is organizing political, logistically speaking, it seems to me like Putin is organizing political movements, like at the political level. You know, BRICS. He's kind of taken the lead on BRICS, organizing these bilateral political agreements with different countries. He's hosting a lot of summits in Russia. He's attending a lot of summits elsewhere. Xi's also hosting a lot of summits in China as well. But you don't really hear as much about China. Like it seems like Russia's way more in the news about the political logistics and the military. So the military logistics, we talked about the Wagner Group. We talked about what they're doing in Africa. The Wagner Group has also been in Syria since 2012, protecting Assad ever since the Arab Spring. So here on the left is from that same Atlantic Council article. This is the Russian investment in African mining and energy infrastructure. So all the yellow represents a nuclear cooperation agreement between Russia and these countries. And then you can kind of do your own, you can understand these symbols. The hammers are the mining, the oil wells are the oil, the little nuclear reactors are where they're either they've signed a memorandum of understanding to build one, or they've already started building one, depending on the color. If it's dark red, like in South Africa, they've already built it. And then the nuclear symbol is a nuclear infrastructure development project in the works. So if you look at on the right, this is the Chinese investment, the One Belt, One Road initiative. I mean, look at how these two maps align. This is since 2010. You're looking at almost the exact same countries that Russia is working in. It's either Russia is there working alongside the Chinese, or Russia is focusing on the countries where that China's not in. And if you look at, for example, this region down here is what really the ECOWAS region, which is this coastline down here in Western Africa. The fact that China has a pretty strong presence there from what this map is showing is interesting, because ECOWAS is this is where the slave trade came from, is this coastline right here.
Yeah. This
is where basically all of those colonies that I showed you earlier, I mean, that's where they all started, was right here. Let's see these little thin coastlines. That's where all of the European colonization of Africa began, and then the British came down here to the Cape of Good Hope. But it's interesting because that's the most deeply embedded stuff, it seems like, is those coastal countries. Right. And the fact that China is in there now, my understanding from what Matt's explained to me is that the Europeans and the colonial era powers just go in there and just all right, yeah, this all belongs to us. You and your kids are going to work the mines. China's come in and said, okay, we're going to invest, build infrastructure. The infrastructure belongs to us, but we're willing to partner with you on the ownership of the resources. So it may not be the best deal ever. Like there probably is a better deal to be had, but it's better than the deal that the Europeans have been giving them, which is nothing. And so a lot of these governments are turning to China and saying, yeah, come in here and build power lines. Yeah, come in here and build roads, build railroads, high-speed railroad in Eastern Africa. Like they're building those all over Kenya and Ethiopia. That's a lot better than what the Europeans are giving them, which is none of that stuff. I mean, you're talking about being there for 150 years and they don't have indoor plumbing or electricity. So it seems to me like China is coming in with this one belt, one road initiative, undercutting the West, trying to take their diplomacy away from them, win over the support of the people and the governing bodies by offering them a better deal. And then in the process, they get ownership stake in these resources. And obviously they're going to own the infrastructure and they're going to sell the electricity to the locals. So it's a good deal for China. It's a better deal for the locals. Is it the best deal possible? That remains to be seen. But that seems to be like what I see China doing. And then I'll show you this trade infrastructure map, which is really interesting because let me see, it's right here. So one of the big things that Shanghai has done is that it's done the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is kind of like intended to be the counter to the EU/NATO. They've developed this thing called the International North-South Transportation Corridor. And it's supposed to be a trade route that undercuts the West trade route. So the blue line represents the European traditional trade route. It goes through the Red Sea, the Suez Canal. We've all heard about the Houthis and them attacking ships down here in the down here near Yemen. This orange line is this new trade route that Russia, India, and China are developing with Iran. And you'll notice that so they go up through the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and they the two ports they have are Bandar Abbas and Shiraz. And Bandar Abbas actually is a new port that they've just built. The Saudis have invested in it. The Saudis and the Iranians have not been friends. They are historic enemies. And the Saudis are now coming in and investing in their trade ports that are going to be a part of this new trade route. It comes up through Iran, goes across the Caspian Sea into Russia, and then comes up to Moscow. And then from Moscow, it can go down through Ukraine. It can go through Belarus up to St. Petersburg. So it seems like these new trade routes that they're trying to develop, this map represents pipelines. So now they're building pipelines that are going to compete. They're going to come in through Kazakhstan. And then obviously they can tie into the existing Russian pipelines that then feed into Kiev and Minsk. But the pipelines, I mean, that's the whole reason we went to the Middle East was the pipelines. Right. And so like Pepe Escobar calls it Pipelinistan, I think is the phrase he coined like 20 years ago to describe why we were in the Middle East. And now, like the big news has been in the past couple years is Germany. Like this is October 2016, Germany to join the North-South Transportation Corridor. Well, that would explain why maybe we're seeing this war between NATO and Russia is because they don't want Germany to join this new trade route, because that Germany being the crux of the European economy, if they join this new trade agreement, this trade route, that basically cuts the old Western oligarchs out completely, and totally shifts the paradigm to what I would describe as the multipolar world order.
Which also tells you why, when you see European globalists freaking out, they're freaking out the most about the Alternative for Germany party, because the AfD is probably going to have a very pragmatic, nationalist, and forward-looking viewpoint when it comes to Russia and when it comes to China. So that's well said. And yeah, the rest of Europe is meaningless from a economic perspective. A lot of Americans are not aware of this. From an economic perspective, from an economic perspective, England, France, Spain, they're tourist states, as you just said. They're nothing. They don't do anything. They don't make anything. They've got no power projection. Germany is a real country. Germany makes stuff. Germany has a lot of people. Germany still has a lot of power. These other countries do not. Now they have less power than they used to, but they still, Germany is Europe, as you point out. And they're the U.S. of Europe. So the rest of Europe is completely meaningless. They're going to fall in line with whatever Germany does, which is why the globalists at the top of Germany right now are desperately trying to stop German nationalists from taking over, and they're appealing to all the usual rhetoric they've been applying to Trumpists, etc. I like that you brought up the Belt and Road Initiative because it's very interesting to put a different lens on that, and certainly something I've been doing the last couple of years, saying, funny, the people who hate the Belt and Road Initiative the most seem to be the people who preside over the current system of globalism. And, the African countries are pretty cool with Russia and China right now. So I pretty much agree with everything you just laid out there.
You have a red coat in your chat, Hugh Man, saying "FUBB, England is awesome."
I mean, is it though? That's why now, Hugh Man, you're gonna come at me like this when I can end you and this whole argument in one little exchange by saying, "Why do you live in the United States, motherfucker?" This is it. The end of the argument. I mean, England sucks. So, Hugh Man is cool, but England sucks. Always has. I actually like France a lot better. I know that's a controversial take, but I think the French are orders of magnitude more based than the English, even though they can be somewhat insufferable to Americans. They've got a much more storied history and a much less evil history, even though they've got an evil history too. British Empire is like the worst thing that ever happened to the whole world. So yeah, not a big fan. All right, last up on the list is the one that Ghost has no interest in. We're gonna mention the Saudis. I think they are big enough. I often in my writing talk about the sovereign trinity, which I consider to be the United States, Russia, and China. I still believe that. I think
Very
that
fair.
from a global reordering, they are the movers and shakers. But I think the Saudis are important enough and pivotal enough to get into this conversation on that scale. And I guess, I want to break this into two sections again. Number 2 is going to be, what do we think their role is going forward? But first, what kind of attracted us to them and thinking of them in these terms? My very brief answer, the Saudi purge. The Saudi purge in 2017 is what made me believe the Q drops were legitimate. And it prompted a deep dive into the Saudis. And, I think that Mohammed bin Salman is a massive player in the Sovereign Alliance, massive player in the Middle East. And I don't want to spoil what I kind of think is going on from a future perspective. I'll save that for my follow-up thoughts. But from an initial perspective, I think that the Saudi purge, and maybe more so, the globalist response to the Saudi purge, was a big counter signal to me that what is going on here, especially in light of being a former liberal, I had a very low opinion of the Saudis, and that was all based on the Bush era and the Clinton era and how the Saudis dealt with them. So when I see a young prince come into power, and he does so at the direct expense, not just of the Saudi, leadership of the time, of the day, but also apparently to the shock of the Bushies and the Clintonites in the West. If he was trying to become one of my guys, that's a good way to start to become one of my guys. But how did you first start thinking that there was something more going on with the Saudis?
Yeah, I mean, it was for sure the Saudi purge, and just like I was following the Q drops the day they started, and they said watch Saudi Arabia this week, watch SA this weekend, and sure enough, like 2 days later or a few days later, they did the Saudi purge, and it was absolutely bizarre.
Do you want to summarize it? There might be some people here that are not familiar with the Saudi purge. Like briefly, kind of what happened in 2017.
Yeah, so I would encourage everyone to go listen to. I did a Book of Trump episode on the Crown Prince, and then I followed it up the next week with with the sword dance. And so then I'm gonna do the 3-part, like the third part of that is gonna be the Saudi purge, which I haven't done yet, but that'll be an upcoming episode. And basically, what happens is if you want to share my screen, this guy, MBS's father becomes king in January 2015 when his brother dies, and immediately makes his son MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who was like an unknown entity geopolitically. Nobody know, the CIA like barely even knew who this guy was reportedly, and he brings 4 people into a room. These 4 guys on screen. He locks the doors and he says, nobody's leaving this room until we figure out how to purge the corruption out of our government. 12 hours later, they have a plan to totally abolish the government and rebuild it from scratch. 10 days later, this is January 2015, that plan is fully executed. The 13 agencies that made up their government were totally abolished. The entire government is reorganized into 2 columns. One is security, which is police and military, and the other is economy, which is self-explanatory. And so he immediately starts a war with the Houthis. This is January 2015. That war lasts 8 years. They finally wrap it up and make peace in April of 2023. And in 2017, Trump comes into power, goes May 20th to Saudi Arabia, the first place he visits as president, and it appears he's about to go back as his first visit as president again. He gets the sword dance. He then goes on a tour of the world like right after that. A month later, January 20th, the guy who was appointed to be crown prince after his uncle died, and that would be this guy, Mohammed bin Naif. Well, I thought I had him here, but Mohammed bin Naif right here. Mohammed bin Naif becomes crown prince in January 2015. June of 2017, a month after Trump visits, this guy is like a total CIA. He was Saudi intelligence for decades. The CIA is basically super relieved to hear that he is in line to become king after MBS's father dies. And in this kind of dramatic moment, he is removed from power. MBS becomes the king, or becomes crown prince. And then September, so jumping forward to September 2017, 5,000 of the radical Wahhabi sheiks, these are the guys who push like the Sharia law stuff, are all purged from the government under MBS. October 1st, the Vegas shooting, and we did an episode on that with G Money and Zach a few weeks ago and speculated on that. And the big speculation is that it was a failed hit on MBS to kill him. Yeah. November 4th, 2017, his father, the king, summons the entire Muslim world to Saudi Arabia, 57 nations. And he says, I have a big announcement to make. Everybody come here and check it out. The whole world goes there. And he says, I just want everyone to understand that my son, the crown prince, is going to be the now acting sovereign. I'm effectively advocating the throne. He's now in charge. So you will report to him when you want to talk to Saudi Arabia. And MBS gets up and says, as my first order of business, I am going to impanel a corruption panel to review our government and figure out where the corruption is. By the way, that panel has already been at work. They met this morning. And the arrests immediately began, and guys literally started running out of the room. People jumped in their private jets. Their private jets reportedly shot out of the sky, taking off from the runway in Riyadh. And a number of people, a number of the most powerful, richest people in the world, these are Saudi princes, were arrested, imprisoned in the Ritz-Carlton, Riyadh. They like converted the hotel into a prison. And when I say that, I mean like they were in the rooms. They were given 12 white shirts, 12 pairs of sweatpants, and 12 socks, just like they would in prison. And they weren't allowed to leave. But they were made comfortable because they wanted the optics for the rest of the family to be like, we're taking care of these people. And, you know, the reports are that they were like tortured and you know, they were interrogated. It's hard to know what's accurate, what isn't. But eventually all of these people who were imprisoned are eventually let go. After about 6 to 8 months, they're all released. Their companies are all seized by the state. They're now controlled by MBS, the big one being Kingdom Holdings, which is a $12 billion investment fund run by Prince Dopey. The other one being the Bin Laden construction firm, which is the largest construction firm in the Middle East, or at least in Arabia. MBS now controls that. And it's also worth noting that Kingdom Holdings, I have that if you want to, I don't know if my screen is still being shared, but Kingdom Holdings, you may have heard of this little company called XAI.
Yeah.
So here's XAI. This is from last May. Saudi Arabia emerged as key investor in Elon Musk's $24 billion startup. And the number one investor is Kingdom Holdings. And they note that Prince Al-Walid is still the front man. So Al-Walid is still allowed to be considered the front man. But as you and I both know,
everybody knows that he doesn't have control of his assets.
Yeah. And so here's the 2018 article from Bloomberg that is explaining that actually he's been quietly controlling everything. And he actually secretly controls Kingdom Holdings, the $12.5 billion global investment firm, which happened to have a majority stake in Twitter, CNN, a number of other companies at the time. And then here it mentions the Bin Laden Group, which is the construction company. Very useful, by the way, to control the Bin Laden Group if you are planning on like building this like amazing new Middle East, So that's basically the Saudi purge in a nutshell. But I would encourage people to watch the Book of Trump episode that I'm going to do in a couple of weeks, where we will like detail that more thoroughly with sourcing and everything. But yeah, basically it's the good twin in the Saudi family usurping the bad twin, and the bad twin was really bad. Like I'm talking about the guys who funded ISIS, the guys who funded Al-Qaeda, the guys who backed the CIA and helped them create all of the really, really nasty radical Islamic terrorism. And to bring it full circle to our conversation earlier, here's a map in Africa as of March of 2024. The darker the red, the more active the insurgency of radical Islamic terrorism against the governments that are being backed by Putin to like be sovereign. And so now you have radical Islamic terrorism, no longer funded by Saudi Arabia, by the way. It's now being reported by like the government of Mali that actually Ukraine is the one funding all of this terrorism now. And where is Ukraine getting its funding again from? I forget.
Exactly.
Who's funding Ukraine? Yeah, the U.S. government.
Yep. Yeah, well said. The Saudis is a deep, deep rabbit hole. One of the things I had written about relatively recent. By the way, am I scheduled for your show tomorrow night? Because
yeah. But if you want to reschedule, I can do Burkina Faso tomorrow night, and we can do it next week.
Okay, I don't want to ruin your show, but it was a rough week with Baby Bright.
I can do
now. I just checked my text messages. I was like, am I scheduled for the book?
You are technically, but then I figured that when you asked me to do this, I was like, maybe he's forgotten, and that's okay because I can do Burkina Faso tomorrow night, and then we can do this next
All right,
week.
we can touch base tomorrow. Either way, I'll be on the Book of Trump soon, whether that's tomorrow or next week or something. But I brought this up recently when Trump signed an executive order on the U.S. Sovereign Wealth Fund next to Howard Lutnick. I'm telling you, people, I've been telling you for weeks, the most signal coming out of the Trump administration right now is all the financial stuff. It's all tied into the stuff we're talking about. Trump name-dropped the Saudis when it came to his investment fund, his sovereign wealth fund. So I'll play
Next, this is an executive order. This charges your Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, and your Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, to begin a process that will hopefully result in the creation of an American sovereign wealth fund.
It's a very exciting event. We're going to have a sovereign wealth fund, which we've never had. We have a lot of things that create wealth, and you're seeing that over the last 2 weeks. I think we've created more wealth. Other people have created de-wealth, the people, my predecessors. We're creating a lot of wealth. Scott, maybe you'd like to say something about it, and I'd ask also Howard to say something.
Let me see if I can find the point.
Sovereign wealth funds, and they're much smaller countries, and they're not the United States. We have tremendous potential in this country, tremendous. You're seeing that, what's happened just in a short period of time. And as an example, TikTok, we're going to be... Other countries have sovereign wealth funds, and they're much smaller countries, and they're not...
Anyway, he says at one point in that exchange, he specifically name drops the Saudis and their sovereign wealth fund. And what I'd also dug into at that time was the convergence, the timeline of the sovereign wealth fund of the Saudis with the Saudi purge. And I kind of laid this timeline out And man, it's interesting. Even the globalist media wrote a lot of hit pieces about Mohammed bin Salman, saying that he was repossessing, he was seizing the assets of all these oligarchs in Saudi Arabia, which is true. He was using it to invest into the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. November 2017, mass arrest, rounding up people, coercing them to hand over money, land, and other assets, including shares in their companies. Businessmen, royal family members, and government officials were detained at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh. We've got all this kind of stuff, right? All of which is to say, I personally believe that the American Sovereign Wealth Fund is following the Saudi playbook. And I think that when Trump name dropped the Saudis as an inspiration for the Sovereign Wealth Fund, he was not just talking about the idea of a sovereign wealth fund. He was talking about how it was going to be funded, how it was going to be seeded anyway. And that is with the seized assets of oligarchs. To transition to sort of the ending on Saudi Arabia. Go ahead.
Real quick on the sovereign, and the really important thing about the Saudi purge, the justification for what he did to those cousins, because, you're talking about thousands and thousands of Saudi royals, and they're all like, what are you doing? Well, in that meeting in January 2015, he told those four guys, he said, look, I've looked at the books, and this sovereign wealth fund, which is about at the time 700 billion, they have an operating budget for their government. Nobody in Saudi pays taxes. $400 billion annual budget. And he said, we are hemorrhaging anywhere from $80 to $100 billion every year right now. And if we don't fix this thing like right now, we are scheduled to become insolvent as a country and as a family by November 2017, which is right when he does the Saudi purge. And so basically somebody had cooked the books so that they were hemorrhaging all this cash. And I think the plan was to basically bring down the House of Saud, collapse the government, and then, the bin Ladens or somebody else, one of their rival family could step in, and that whole place would have turned into chaos and would have been a non-factor. And that'll lead us in the next part of the conversation. But I kick it back to you.
Yeah, and the second half, like I said about the other countries here, is what do we think their role is on the Sovereign Alliance? There's a lot of roles they could take up in the future. For me, there's a few things I'll touch on. Number one is when we're talking about finances, I think that they are demonstrating a model for a wealth fund. I think they also demonstrated a model for anti-corruption purges. Now, I don't believe that Americans mentally and culturally are in a place where they can deal with a Saudi purge taking place in the United States to the same degree. But, something similar, I think, has been going on behind the scenes. Number two, I would say that this is something you talk about quite a bit. I think that Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates in particular, outside of that, are starting to demonstrate what does a tax-free, unfettered economic system look like. They're trying to push into that future. They're trying to encourage futurism. I mean, even they get kind of lambasted by a lot of mainstream media for this, and even financial media. But you even look at Dubai. They've got man-made islands going on. They've got this, they're attracting all this wealth. Now, I understand the criticisms of this, because you can't, like, Ghost and I can't go to Dubai without taking out a mortgage, right? In terms of, you want to live large like the Saudis, you want to live large like these guys. It's naive to just say, this is the future, build some man-made islands, here's your $40 million mansion, right? Like, I get it. There's a lot of that lifestyle porn on YouTube about the Middle East. With that said, this is indicative of a shift that's going on in the Middle East, where the Saudis and the princes of that region that you know more about are trying to redefine what they are and what the Middle East is. And they're trying to push it into the future and say that this is actually a place that we can using our wealth, using the wealth of our land, we can turn it into a really wondrous and futuristic and plentiful and bountiful place. And I think that's just the beginnings of that. And they've got a lot of projects, in the works, and Mohammed bin Salman is chief among them, of talking about some of these large-scale economic projects. Final thing I'd say, most directly, what do I think their role is in the Sovereign Alliance? We're already seeing it, and Ghost and I have projected this for several years. We were effing right, just like we always are. And that is that they are playing the role of peace brokers in the Middle East. We often talk about peacemakers. You know, I consider Donald Trump a peacemaker. I consider Vladimir Putin a peacemaker, people who mandate peace. I think the Saudis are filling an important role that isn't quite the same thing. And I think the Saudis are over there demanding peace. I think the Saudis are brokering peace between nations that normally wouldn't be interacting with each other. And besides the obvious effect of peace being a desirable outcome of people in this audience and of everybody in the world, I think there's something special about the idea that, in my lifetime anyway, and before it, the Middle East has been known as a place that is ubiquitous, synonymous with war and with chaos. And that's just what the Middle East is. And I think that if the Saudis narratively play a key role in the brokering of peace, not just within the Middle East, but between Western and Eastern powers vying in the Middle East, it's got a very special opportunity to start to redefine the Middle East, not just as not being a chaos sector, but being a sector that helped to broker world peace. And if we're talking about a war of stories and a narrative, wouldn't that be a great story for Mohammed bin Salman and Saudi Arabia to be known as peacemakers between East and West, rather than sort of the chaos countries that they've been known as for so long?
Yep, that's exactly right. One of the primary motivations for MBS is 9/11. He is notoriously been quoted when he was 16 when 9/11 happened. He watched the second plane hit the tower, and his first reaction was, the world is going to come after us. The world is going to blame us for this. And then I think the quote is, I'm going to hunt down every single person who was responsible for this and make them pay dearly for putting us in this position, for framing us for doing this. And if you extrapolate that to understand what he means by that, and, you know, the people who would have been involved, you're talking about the enemies of Donald Trump are the ones who did 9/11. The people inside the U.S. government are the ones who did 9/11. And so to that point, I completely agree with what you said, and I can add some color into that if you want to share my screen. This is a great video that Chris Paul shared on. I'm not going to play the sound, but played on. I'm going to scrub through it. This shows the largest companies by market cap, and it starts in 1979, and you can kind of see it's U.S. companies. Japan comes in the 90s. Then U.S. companies come back in. It's oil companies mostly. Then Coca-Cola, mostly oil companies, but like oil companies, car companies, Exxon. There's Exxon. There's BP. Here comes the British with BP. Here comes China with some Chinese companies. And then we get all the way. There's a random Brazil company right there in 2010. But when we get to 2019, all of a sudden, I want to play it. Bam, Aramco. So Aramco comes in and they just become the big stack. $1.8 trillion is their value. So Aramco, for those who don't know, it's the Saudi oil company, the nationalized oil company. It's always been a private company, and it's always been speculated to be worth something around $2 trillion. Nobody's ever known that because it's not public, so that there's no access to their books. Well, so the question is, how did MBS get them out of that hole? Because they were in a major hole. Well, he publicly offered 5% of Aramco to anybody who wanted to buy it. And so he sold 5% of Aramco, 5% of 1.8 trillion was offered in 2019. That's what got them out of the hole and made them solvent again. He then turned around and said, and Donald Trump talked about helping him do this, and he said, I need to diversify, divest out of oil because our entire society is totally dependent on oil. Obviously, the future long-term of humanity is not oil, and they're discovering oil all over the world now. And, you know, it's not smart to have all of our eggs in one basket. And that's why you have seen them investing in everything from sports entertainment. They bought 10% of Heathrow Airport last year. they're investing majorly in high tech. They developed at their own university in Riyadh. They developed a system of running oil runoff, which is like the salt water they use in fracking. They run the oil through this machine that extracts lithium out of it. And they had Aramco ran the first test at 2 oil fields in Saudi Arabia, and they were actually able to yield lithium from this. So that means no like exploitative like strip mining practices or anything like that, or like hardcore labor like required. You're just pulling lithium out of like salt water. And now every single major oil company, Exxon, all of them are now lining up to license this technology. And this could be the future of like extract like mining lithium is just from oil fields. So they are doing this. They're very smart about how they're doing this. They're basically divesting out of oil and becoming a very diverse economy. And he said, I want to be a high tech economy. I want to be like the next Silicon Valley. And then we've also know he wants to be a tourism based economy. He wants to make. He already said the next Middle East Riviera. The Middle East Riviera is the Red Sea. It's not Gaza, which is how I kind of knew Trump was bullshitting when he said that, is because there's an article from 2018 where MBS says we're building the Riviera of the Middle East in the Red Sea, Saudi Arabia. So that's the economic part of it. You mentioned like wanting to broker and like be like the center. Part of like the tourism thing is they want to be the like conference center of the world, like the literal crossroads of the world. This is where I think the whole idea of like, what if Saudi Arabia was supposed to collapse and wasn't supposed to be here right now? How different would this whole situation be post October 7th? And then you look at the Netanyahu, like this map, like this picture right here. This is Netanyahu last summer at the UN giving a speech and talking about our Arab partners. The whole reason that the neocons got behind the Abraham Accords is because the Abraham Accords were supposed to unite the entire Arab world, which stretches across North Africa, and weaponize it against Iran. And so get the Arabs to fight the Iranians, their historic enemies, Shia versus Sunni Islam. And that would basically kick off World War III. Russia and China would come in behind Iran. America would come in behind, and Israel would come in behind the Arabs, and we would have World War III. Well, what we saw after October 7th was MBS following in his father's footsteps. November 2017 summons the entire Islamic world, 57 nations, to Riyadh, and then told all of them to sit down and shut up and don't do a damn thing. And Matt Arrett, like when I told him that, when I like in October of 2023, when Matt and I first started doing Breaking History together, I told him my whole theory about, because he was like you, he was a liberal. He thought the Saudis were evil. And I told him like, yeah, I think MBS is going to summon the entire Muslim world and basically tell him to sit down and shut up. And he was like, that would be awesome, but I think that's kind of a pipe. I think that's like a little like too much hopium. That's like a pipe dream. And he's like, in hindsight, he is like, holy shit, I cannot believe, number one, that they did that, but number two, that the entire Muslim world listened to them. Like 2 billion Muslims are like, oh yeah, like, okay, 38-year-old MBS, you're just going to tell us all to sit back and sit down and shut up while Israel just carpet bombs Gaza, and our people like back home are screaming at us to do something. And that's exactly what you're going to do, because it's the Kobayashi Maru. The only winning move is not to play.
Absolutely. Well said. I've definitely been considering the Middle East, the Kobayashi Maru. That's what I'd said after October 7th, that's how Trump was playing it. He's kind of stepping away and letting the sifting commence in various directions. The Saudis are going to play a huge role in that. So yeah, I think, Ghost and I are probably going to be on stream, his stream, my stream, plenty of times in the future to talk about all of these countries in much greater detail. Some of you are probably like, you talked about enough detail tonight, but this is like the surface. This is just touching on some of these countries. There's other countries. There's Brazil's an interesting country. Certainly a country that years ago felt like it was going much more heavily in the sovereign direction. And then they've been undergoing, even more rug pulls than the U.S. has been undergoing in terms of the Biden era. You compare that to the Lula era. So they're interesting. I find Hungary to be an interesting country in Europe, where it concerns sort of being a breakaway country from the European Union, perhaps. There's a lot going on. But this was kind of a surface level dive on the Sovereign Alliance. We genuinely believe that these countries are all working together, as we said at the jump. Not necessarily, they don't necessarily all have the same exact vision, but they have the same vision of what they don't want to be. And what they don't want to be is what the world currently is, controlled by this Western oligarchy, this corporatist communist class. And, I've said this many times in my writing, but there are three men that George Soros has deemed threats to global democracy. Those are Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping. And they are, I think Mohammed bin Salman might have made the cut somewhat recently. So, anytime you see that, I often say they are not lying to you when they call something a threat to their democracy. It just depends on whether or not you want to be a part of that democracy.
Somebody in chat, Catherine Finley, Live Golf. The new story, like Chris texted me about it yesterday, or maybe 2 days ago. They're now talking. So Live Golf bought the PGA,
right?
And my friends are big golf fans. So my normie friends were all texting about this a few years ago, and this was all like, it was like a year and a half. This was all like being fought out, and my friends were all laughing, being like, these stupid Saudis, like the PGA is going to own Live. And then, of course, like ESPN comes out and says, Live actually bought out the PGA. That Live now owns the PGA. Well, now they're talking about merging the PGA and Live into one group, because the PGA said if any golfer plays in Live, you'll be banned for life from the PGA. And Live said, okay, that's fine. Who's your number one golfer? All right, how about $600 million contract and you never play in another PGA event again? And the guy said, yes, I will take that deal. $600 million, 100%. Never going to play in the PGA again. I'm actually going to the Masters this weekend with my dad, and I think I'm going to order a bunch of Live gear and just wear all my Live gear.
Bring like a Saudi flag and
yeah. Trump, by the way, is like deeply connected to Live. Yep. They play all the Trump courses, and the PGA is like the crown jewel. Like if you watch their events, all of their advertisers are like the who's who of villains in the corporate American world.
Yep. Well said. I think F1 is similar. It's all villains, basically. And yeah, the Saudis are heavily involved in the combat sports world. They're making waves in that world when it comes to investments into MMA companies, huge investments into boxing. They've been putting on some big fights there. So interesting moves going on. And Ghost and I have talked privately quite a bit about the idea of the Saudis trying to ingratiate themselves to Western culture before governments. They don't care about the governments. They care about the culture. So that's what they're going after. So I'll hit some rants here. Ghost, you can take off if you need to. Otherwise, I'll get to rants if you want to hang up.
Nope,
all right. Tom Terrific. I got those. Fixed bayonet, $30. BB, I tagged you in the Las Vegas Telegram chat with Grok's answer to who coined the term Sovereign Alliance. Check it out. What does it say? Let me see there. Pull that up. Term Sovereign Alliance does not have a universally recognized signal originator based on widely available historical or academic records. However, in the context of online discourse, a user, Burning Bright, claimed to have coined the term. They describe it as an attempt to encapsulate a theorized mutual plan among core leaders of an anti-globalist movement. Outside of this specific claim, the Sovereign Alliance could theoretically have been used independently in various contexts. Burning Bright's assertion remains a self-attributed origin tied to a niche online narrative. I'll take it, man. Self-attributed origin of an online narrative. Hey, if Grok doesn't know who else coined it, it's got to defer to my claim of having coined it. So I'm sticking to it.
Love it.
Melindy attempted to get y'all's attention with this post, quoting an Irishman about Brexit and the new tariffs. This is an X post. Trump's 10% UK tariffs is a genius move as it makes it financially viable to retain Brexit. What UK exporter will want to go back to the EU so they can double their costs of exports to the US? This is real art of the deal stuff a career politician like Starmer would never see coming. And he can't get the UK back into the EU now. The Orange Man is a genius. From Thomas Sheridan of Ireland. I don't know who that is, but sounds based.
It sounds very based.
67, $20. Not a pussy, even though. That's the whole rant. Well,
not a
thank
pussy,
you.
even, not a pussy, even though cliffhanger.
Even though what? Yeah. Sounds like some pussy talk to me. Radiant Seas, $10. Blessed Sunday to all American patriots. People of dual citizenship don't have respect and loyalty to our USA. Religious freedom is also being abused by evil people who want to take over us. That's true, but they're a bunch of bitches.
Yep.
Jane Klein, $20. Love your mood today. Very honest. That's what we need. I was so calm today earlier too, and I just, you know.
I know. It's funny. Like BB didn't even mention to me that he was like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna go full ham," and then I was like,
"No,
damn."
I was like, "We'll just
right.
chill. We'll just have like
he's
a
like,
nice."
We'll just chill. Let's figure it out. And he's like, "Motherfucker."
Yeah. F these motherfuckers.
I love it.
You know, it's been a crazy week, right? I had Baby Bright was nuts last week. He had a big regression, but we got to go out today with him at a restaurant. He was a little angel.
Good.
And
he's at 4 months now.
He's at 14 weeks this week.
Yeah. So he's at the age where
he's in his 4th month.
Yeah. He's at the age where you get the regression. All 3 of my kids had it. Doesn't matter what you do, the regression comes. He'll gain it all back, and you probably feel like you're like, holy shit, all that of that progress is now undone. It's like, nope, it's just part of the process.
Yeah. 2 weeks ago we were like, man, he's sleeping like 6 to 8 hours at a rip, and then he was just like, fuck you. I'm up constantly. So we'll see what happens.
It'll happen again when he teethes. It'll happen again when he teethes, but it's just
he's already starting early.
Yeah,
he's starting to bite his hands.
Well, that's good. Like, get it all out of the way.
Yeah. So, you know, it's a lot. But also at Badlands, we had the usual bullshit. And again, that's when we see the accounts. We know what's going on. It's the same shit as always. Nothing new under the sun. You haven't got us in 3 years. You're not going to get us now. So
damn right.
Just, you know, keep doing the we are winning prayer circle and enjoy that. Just keep that shit over there. Don't really give a shit anymore. Melindy, good share from Jordan, Batman or Robin Hood. Jordan Sather. He's a bit of an extremist, but what's he say? This is in a non-theory about tariffs. This is the stuff we've been talking about on the shows. You know, Trump's using game theory on the tariffs. He's basically forcing companies to flood into U.S. treasuries and out of the stock market, and that's going to force the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates, which is what Donald Trump has been wanting them to do. When they cut interest rates, stocks are going to surge. So it's a perfect feedback loop. IIS2C, $20. You guys are brilliant. Thank you for your research and hard work. Thank you. Thank you guys for supporting. And please hit the thumbs up button. It's a big deal. Sleep State. Alexander II sent the Russian Navy to the ports of New York and San Francisco with the instruction to take orders from Lincoln if the British and the French joined the Confederation.
Yep. That's true. Matt's the one who also explained that to me. That the Russians intervened and kept the British and the French out because they would have come in on the side of the South because of the cotton trade.
Right. Nano Zozo, $5. Ghost. We the chat would like to hire you to teach history for the kids. 1 year U.S. history pre-recorded was suggested first.
I'm 100% open to that. I'm 100% open to doing something like that. So yeah, let's talk.
Duke Club, $5 BB. I was one of the 3 a.m. GART guys with the wife from Moscow. I'm going to Moscow in a few weeks. Anything you'd like me to bring back for you? Bring Vladimir Putin to GART.
Yes, I definitely condone and endorse that. I don't know. I'm trying to think like vodka. I mean, I don't know. I mean that
feels very vodka guy. Yeah,
it feels very cliche. It just feels very cliche.
Yeah.
I mean, what's something cool to get from Russia? I don't know.
I got sick once on vodka, and
now you're not a big vodka guy.
Yeah, like I'll occasionally have a Moscow Mule, but otherwise I tend to steer clear of it.
You're Irish, so you probably like potato vodka. You
Yeah,
probably prefer that.
It's the whiskey is never far.
There you go.
So just living the dream here. Matryoshka dolls are cool. I've got them here. Friend Jake, Canadian, gave me these at a GART. So I think Matryoshka dolls are cool, but I am also retarded. So, make of that what you will. Steph Asia, great team for $10. Thank you, Steph.
Thank you.
Sleep State, spy Putin infiltrated the WEF under the cover of being a president. Maybe. Revelnator, $10. I got to know, guys, at the Guards, do you avoid this subject when JB is around? I love bringing it up on his show. It really gets his yang up. I mean, if you saw the panel with me and Chris and JB at GART 1 or 2.
It was it was Cocoa Beach, I think.
Cocoa Beach. No, I don't censor my thoughts around JB, and I like JB and everything. But yeah, I don't really care about the Jacksonville education system. Like, it doesn't really factor into my thinking.
Dude, I had no idea it was going to happen either. Like, I was totally blindsided by that. I had no idea that it was going to be like, it was going to be like opposites. But man,
hey,
that was crazy.
Yeah, when we got my dog, I'll never forget. He's a working line, Russian blood, Slovakian blood, German Shepherd. A lot of stuff in there. And they told us, like, you may have interacted with German Shepherds before, but this is not a normal German Shepherd. And the way I said, well, like, how would you describe him? And he said, he doesn't have any backward steps. And I thought it was a great way to describe this dog. And I love him, but he was a big challenge, and had to learn how to navigate that. But I would just say, in the context of arguments, if anybody hasn't figured it out before, I do not take backward steps. So it doesn't mean I'm always right, but I'm not afraid of argument. I think argument's fun. I think argument's interesting. And, argument can get heated, of course, but if you can't deal with that, then you just really shouldn't be involved in this kind of stuff. And this is also sort of the rhetoric that we put forward about the winning, the everything is winning crowd. It's funny because we are very positive people. We believe this whole network was built. This is what annoys me about some of the rhetoric against Badlands. This whole network was very literally built on top of a theory that gave hundreds of thousands of people, and we have the metrics in this country, hope that Donald Trump didn't just walk away after the 2020 election. That's what this whole network was built on, with John's research, as much shit as I give him. So to be branded, like, there's plenty of shit people talk about us, and they're going to do it forever, and we're not winning enough, and we're not cheerleading enough, and why don't you just follow the Shut the fuck up about that kind of stuff. For people that brand us as doomers, doing that after the whole network was built on saying we have a path out of this, and Trump did not abandon us when nobody was saying that, is bullshit. And that is the stuff that I'm never going to stand for. And everybody, you can all follow who you want to follow, right? You're all adults. You watch other shows. That's good. Like, we don't need you all to watch us only. And we're all adults. We all understand what's going on. But that's what I push back on. And that's why I don't mind saying this. Not everybody wants to say stuff like this because you get the shrapnel, and I totally get it. But that general sentiment is such bullshit. And if you want to go into this like little kiddie corner where all you're allowed to do is say positive things all the time and build each other up when none of you were doing it during the dark ages, then go do that. That's just not what we're interested in doing, right? Yeah. So, and this world is a very weird world in this InfoWar crap. And yeah, some of the people that come into chats and that make these accounts, they are not good actors. They are people that have done it to us 3-4 times now. Anytime somebody leaves Badlands, and by the way, it is not the people who leave Badlands who encourage this behavior, most of them. It is people that are engaging in this behavior independently. So this is the stuff that I push back on. And obviously the people that are watching the show right now are not people who have been sifting out with that kind of rhetoric. But for the people that do, and you just want that this is the winning crowd, and we're just going to like recite biblical prayers and say like, nothing can stop what's coming without actually engaging in any thought about what's going on and what we're going to do in the future when patriots aren't saving us every day, then just go somewhere else. It's like, It's real simple. It shouldn't have to be said, but it has to be said like every month. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but
Yeah, I like I would say that like if you enjoyed what we discussed here, I mean, I like when Burning Bright came out with Righteous Russia, which I didn't discover until discovering John in like May or June of 22. So that's what led me to your Substack. Like what you wrote is exactly what I was thinking in my head, but hadn't like articulated it to myself even. You know, it's like you articulated it in a way that I didn't really even understand until I read it in your words. And it was you who did that. It wasn't like other people. I mean, you know, Q himself alluded to it, but it had never been articulated until you did it. And then that's like, it helped advance my own thinking. And I was like, oh, I was already like really into these ideas. I just hadn't really explored them in that way. And I had been exploring them that way, but not in that articulation. And if for those who do enjoy my work and do like enjoy the conclusions that I come to, and I get the question a lot, where do you get your information from? Well, I watch a lot of people, like listen to people, read people who I don't necessarily agree with, who I said earlier are like, a lot of them are actually blackpilling right now. And these are earnest Trump supporters, earnest Trump administration, like former Trump administration people, Trump friends, Trump consultants who are looking at the thing, looking at the situation and arriving at a conclusion that I myself would probably arrive at if I didn't have these other lenses to see it through, including the Sovereign Alliance. But I can still take the information they're putting out there because a lot of them have access to things that I don't have access to, and are looking at things that I don't think about. And I'm drawing like what's useful and then discarding the rest. It's not, I'm not getting triggered by their analysis. I'm not getting upset by what they're saying. I can listen to them, appreciate them, respect them. There are a lot of them I tremendously respect. Kevork Almazian, the Syriana analysis guy, is fantastic. I don't agree with everything he says, but him and I have spoken like on stream together. He's had me on his show to talk about Trump, you know, back during the Biden administration. And it's like, that's what you should be doing. You should be not only listening to people who you respect, you should be listening to people you despise so you better understand the enemy's thinking and the enemy's rhetoric. So, you know, getting triggered by somebody's analysis is just kind of silly. And if you get upset by it, then I guess just don't listen to it. But yeah.
Well said. And, you know, I think it also spurs the thought of, you know, I often try to engage with somebody's rhetoric by taking what their assertion is and following it to its logical conclusion and agreeing with it and then seeing what I think of it. So for example, my most popular article I ever wrote is called We Are Q. It is a firm endorsement of the Q drops. Contrary to popular belief, John Harold wrote one of his devolution articles all about the Q drops and how he believes that they were a part of the military intelligence operation, that they were a core part of the devolution operation, that they were a huge mass, you know, psyop, etc., all this kind of stuff. And we'll get branded as like anti-Q people. And what I like to say is, if you believe in the plan to save the world and the Patriot plan that is laid out in the Q drops, at some point in the future, there isn't going to be this group of patriots involved in this current plan. Even if we take everything that you're saying and we agree with every single piece of it, there is going to be a time when you have to take responsibility. And as Ronald Reagan said, freedom isn't passed down in the bloodstream. You have to take control. You have to take responsibility of your country. You have to take responsibility of yourself. And in my opinion, this is what I said at GART Vegas, the Q drops say this emphatically. They talk about taking this stuff into your own hands, of taking some of the research from the drops and applying it to your own life. And again, like, obviously Stormy and Abs left the network. I think that their show is great. I think they're great Q analysts. It's some people that try to turn us against each other. They try to turn us against them. They try to turn them against us. We see the bullshit in the chat on this side. I'm sure it's going on over on that side. That's nothing that anybody that's actually doing the work and doing the research and analyzing this stuff on for us or for them that is endorsing. So we all know this is the elephant in the room right now. And a year ago it was Kyle and whatever. It is what it is. Like, grow the fuck up. Get over it. As Ghost said, and this is not related to this rant. It all just kind of spun out from it. It's what I was obviously addressing at the start of the show. Follow who you want to follow and then grow up. Just grow up. Just get over it. Just follow the people you like. Don't follow the people you don't like. And everything's fine. Right? But we get so much, it's maybe a minority, but it's a very vocal minority who tries to determine what we should be talking about and how we should be talking about it. And these people talk about it in more friendly terms, in terms that I like. That's not what the drops were about. That's not what the truth community is about. That's not what Badlands is about. That's not what we're about. Right? Yeah. So like, I hope it doesn't need to be said too many more times. But if you think that there's a point where we're just going to like break and start doing the unity bullshit, it's never going to happen. It's never, ever going to happen. We got into this by being completely uncontrollable, shit-eating wild men. And that's what we're going to be going forward. And obviously, if you watch the show, you like it. But if you don't, then fuck off. Like, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother Ghost. It doesn't bother John. It doesn't bother Badlands. So do whatever you want to do. But like all the little things in chat and the accounts that I see over on the other channels, like you're the same accounts that were doing this a year ago. You're the same 2 years ago. We see what it is and we're not worried about it.
Yeah. It's, I mean, like ideas deserve to be explored. Some ideas deserve to be explored more than others. And I mean, we like to make fun of sometimes of people who are wasting our time or wasting the public's time, like ruminating on ideas that just don't deserve attention. A great example is like the whole woke, like tranny thing. It's like, we don't need to spend 4 years or 5 years
talking about trannies,
like debating ourselves about why trannies, like why like elevating trannies is a bad idea. It's like, that's a really like simple conversation to have that doesn't require more than maybe an hour of our time. And the fact that people have built whole platforms around it, like the Daily Wire, is really, really silly. And so it's like they're building up a straw man that's really easy to defeat. And like the whole woke thing, the woke thing is dead. I mean, the Democrats are dead. I mean, they're never going to be relevant again nationally, politically, like ever. Right. The enemy now is like the people who have infiltrated MAGA and are pretending to be MAGA, but really they're like neocons and are going to lead us back into like the George Bush camp, which is why I think Trump has invited them into the camp and been like, yeah, here you go, center stage. What he did with Biden, he pushed Biden and Kamala Harris out on the center stage, handed them the microphone, tell everybody about yourself.
Yep.
That's what they did. And now he's doing the exact same thing with the neocons in the Republican Party.
Totally agree. And the conning stuff we talk about. And, you know, I would say, in this community, like the Rumble sort of truth community, I think the threat comes in where you've got all these accounts and these networks that try to turn networks against each other, and they try to turn people against each other, and they try to brand one channel as anti-Badlands, and then they try to brand another channel as anti-Q. Like that's what they're trying to do with us, right? It's like it's obviously bullshit. Just again, follow the rhetoric you want to follow.
If you want to go debate yourself about, like, if you want to go have that debate with yourself about why trannies are bad, and you want to spend the next 3.5 years doing that, have at it. Like that's fine. We probably are going to make fun of you, but that's your own thing, man. Like whatever blows your hair back.
Right. Murfster7, $20. Great show as always. I tried doing a boost, but kept getting kicked out. Just to thank you and tell you I enjoyed your solo thoughts at the end of last week's show. Thank you. I'm glad you guys like that. You know, not every guest is going to be an absolute savage like Ghost and just hang out all night. But you know, I'll do some solo stuff at the end with some of these shows. But yeah, I don't know why the boost didn't work for you. I got one tonight. Todd 12 is.
People have been saying that the rants aren't working out. Like, I don't know. It might be a back end thing, but
Todd 12 is the U.S. in Africa at all? I don't think officially, besides military.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the UN. The UN has been in there since for decades, and it's the French military is there on behalf of the UN, and those are the ones who got caught kidnapping and raping kids in Nigeria, I think it was in 2015.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the U.S., I'm sure there's like special. Oh, actually, no, there are special forces there because we did the Tonga Tonga ambush from 2008, 2017, which was meant to make Trump look bad. So yeah, they are there. It's like special forces though.
Less gush. The sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce said in 1944, "In Russia, there comes the hope of the world." Interesting. Fixed bayonet, $30. If commander-in-chief and president are two different things, as Ghost said, then Trump could well have been the commander-in-chief without being president during devolution. Yeah, I broadly agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I've sort of maybe like officially he wasn't, but I sort of think de facto that's what was going on.
It is interesting that they're two different titles. I don't really have a firm opinion about like whether that's the case, but I would kind of defer to John just because he understands that like inside and out. So
right. Wedge Gravy Ghost, what's the price per ton between the two routes? How much extra is the carrying supply chain cost between routes? Maybe
are you talking about the north-south transportation corridor? I mean,
I'm guessing.
I have no idea, but I mean, but I know that they basically it's a decentralized situation where you have British and French companies that control the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal has been consolidated into a company. I think it's a company that operates out of Paris called the Suez Company. And that was very nefariously done against the Egyptian people. The Egyptian people publicly funded the construction of the Suez Canal. They defaulted on their loans in 1875 because the British flooded the markets, the global markets, with cotton from the South because the South was embargoed. And then after the Civil War ended, they flooded the markets with the cotton. It drove the price of cotton down. That destroyed the Egyptian economy. They couldn't make their payments to the London banks. The London came in and said, all right, that's great. We now control your government. We're going to put this guy, Evelyn Barron, in charge of your government. By the way, the Suez Canal, that belongs to us now as well. And that led to all kinds of problems in the 20th century that Nasser was trying to solve with the Soviets. And it's led to wars with Israel and everything we're dealing with right now. Israel is talking about invading Sinai Peninsula right now. And that is also connected, I think, to the Suez Canal. So it's a big mess, but it's all connected.
I had a wolf invasion during your
nice.
address. What are you doing, buddy? Come here. Come here. You want to say hi? This is the large.
Look at that wolf.
Hey. What do you think? What do you think? Doesn't think anything right now. Lecker said, amazing show. Thank you for breaking all this down as well as connecting to the Q drops. Thank you. Let's go. I thought we were anti-Q. I thought we were the anti-Q network. Wedge Gravy, you guys think Trump's creating a sovereign fund to suck up all the excess USD in the world and effectively taking them off the market? No, I don't think that's how it's functioning. I do think there's a speculative attack against the Federal Reserve's fiat dollar system, but that's going to take some time to play itself out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping to see that whether it's a sovereign wealth fund or like the tariffs, I'm basically looking to see a system like the Saudis have, where taxation of the citizenry is no longer necessary. It's funded through basically people wanting access to your markets, because our market is the most desirable marketplace in the world. There isn't even a close second. In order to access the market, you pay a fee. You can then sell your goods to a huge consumer base. You pay a small fee for that, and that fee goes into a pot, and that pot then funds the U.S. government, which shouldn't be very big anyway.
Right. All like three people. Julie JN, I liked Lutnick the first time I heard him speak. Maybe I was swearing in. I saw someone post on X that he's Trump's handler. They said he's always standing behind him, just as Blinken did with Biden. I saw like podcasts talking about like the Jews. They've got Howard Lutnick behind Trump. I mean, as Ghost has been saying, like, let him do it. Let him, like, watch Benny and the boys all get together and Candace start talking about the Jews have got Trump. It's kind of the last sifting, and we're looking forward to it. And, I'm also looking forward to the crickets in the comments section about us shitting all over the unity play of these people for 3 years because we told you they were going to do this. We told you that all the people going all in on the Ron DeSantis op were little bitches at best and controlled opposition at worst. And now they're going to do the Zionist thing against Donald Trump. So it's all those same people.
Dude, doesn't it make, I mean, it more and more, it just makes my whole like evolution theory look more and more solid, where Donald Trump literally saved Kanye West from Harley Pasternak in December 2016. Kanye is the one who started this whole like it's the Jews thing, right? And yet he's the one guy who's sitting here right now saying, I'm with Trump 100%, Trump for life. And these other people are like, holy crap, Trump's a puppet. And I mean, he's got the signal right now.
We're getting close to the stage where the Jews are starting to say it's the Jews. And that is a perfect situation.
Yeah, pretty much. Exactly.
Wedge Gravy, Netanyahu, 2 maps. Could be a map of the 2 trade routes. We covered that. Mrs. Freedom, what are your thoughts on Boris Yeltsin? Yeltsin was pre-Poroshenko, right?
Yes. Yeah, I believe so. Yeltsin was pre-Poroshenko, if I'm not mistaken. And then Poroshenko came in and...
President of Russia to 1990. Yeah. Yeltsin was the one who preceded Putin. Yeltsin's interesting because he's almost got like a Jimmy Carter reputation in Russia, like of a well-meaning guy who just couldn't get anything done. So not Poroshenko, I misspoke earlier, but he was the Putin predecessor. And he's like the Russian Jimmy Carter for better and worse. And but he did pave the way for Putin. So I don't know what to make of that, but right now Oliver Stone is in the news for the JFK hearing, but he's also in the news now because he's saying that basically Americans have been brainwashed to hate Russia by the media. He did an excellent 4-part interview with Putin between 2015 and 2017 that I would encourage people to go listen to. I think they're each 1 hour. And the first one, Putin talks about that. He talks about coming into power and the guy who was in power before him. He's very respectful about it, but he's kind of like, the guy was kind of floundering and we had to step in. And Putin was trying to be friends with the West. He was like, that was a big reason why he didn't back the sovereign alliance with their power projection, is he wanted to be friends with the West. He had to choose, and he's like, I'm going to choose to like make friends and be more neutral. And then the sovereign alliance got picked apart one by one. So this time he's coming in hard and backing them. Illinois Donnie, $25. Great show, guys. Long-time listener, first-time ranter. You all keep me sane in this blue cesspool of a state. Thanks for all you do. Can't wait to get to a GART Deadwood. Deadwood should be freaking fun. GART Plymouth is coming up in just a few weeks. Right down the street. There are tickets available. Badlandsmedia.tv/events. Less kush. It's important to supplement the Q drops with smart geopolitics podcasters. They bring it all together and we learn. I agree with that approach. Both, as Go said earlier. Bruce Lee approach. Take what works, leave the rest. That's going to be different for everybody. There's just this immature intent to try to, demonize people that, aren't saying the messages you like. And the last one,
emotion,
last one, man, Badlands is the only broadcast that's providing clarity to everything. Your in-depth analysis is second to none. 100% John is launching people's careers. It's also something to consider when it comes to this stuff. Where did they start? Anyway, thank you guys very much for the support. I will check the
Appreciate y'all's
Boost
support
page. I think we got one from Arlene, $10. Burning Bright and Ghost, you're my 2 favorites on Badlands. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and research. I enjoy your programs and learn so much from you both.
Thank you
very much. Much appreciated. I don't know if I grabbed this last week, but Master Chemo sent $100 over, and Micro Toolmaker sent $77 over. Much appreciated to both of you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I shouted you out last show, but either way, it's another shout out. Ghost is on the Book of Trump every Monday night at 7:30.
7:30. Yep. And Badlands Daily Tuesday morning at 10. Breaking History Wednesday at noon. And then I recently started a geopolitics show, 3:00 Friday afternoon, where I just run through the news headlines and do a little bit of analysis. So
nothing much.
Nothing much
going on.
It's supposed to be an hour show, but it's been turning into an hour and a half show. So
yeah, of course. Jim Klain comes in at the buzzer and says, "I really like Howard Lutnick. What do you guys think of him?" I've been saying
I like him too.
He's, to me, the most signal-soaked communicator in Trump's orbit right now. He can't help himself. He often says more than he should say, in my opinion, in the interviews that he's giving. Part of that's the East Coast mentality. I often say more than I should say, as you guys may or may not have noticed when it comes to dealing with me.
He's also emotionally driven by 9/11, just like MBS. And Trump is I think Trump is too.
Yes. There is an interview in October 2024 with Howard Lutnick on Anthony Pompliano's YouTube channel. They're talking about economic stuff. It goes into a whole section on 9/11 and how that affected Howard Lutnick. I firmly believe that what you just said, I firmly believe that Howard Lutnick is out for revenge.
Yep.
For 9/11, and that he has been he was a key strategist behind Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. So he's been kind of silent running until now. This is the A team. This is the real A team. I think the Hegseths of the world, it's all fun. Like, it is what it is. I don't think it's very signal based. I think Trump is using, as Chris would say, the TV characters and putting them in positions he wants to put them in. I believe that Howard Lutnick is a signal guy in Trump's orbit. He goes way back with him. And I agree with you. I think both of them are highly motivated by 9/11 and the aftermath of that. So we'll see. But yeah, great stuff to look into. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for joining. I'm sure you will be back. And we did a nice short one tonight. Just touched on a few things. I'm going to outro with the intro. Ghost, you do not have to wait for the whole outro. You can go to bed if you want to do that. But thanks for joining. Thank you guys for watching. Please share the show out. Please hit the thumbs up button. I know we say it all the time, but it really and honestly makes a big difference with the show. It gets us on the leaderboard. It gets Rumble to consider whether or not they're going to promote certain channels, that kind of thing, right? So it does help us when you do that. It's free to do. Otherwise, we both run Substacks. We both go on the shows. Please follow us. And otherwise, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly, and we'll see you next week.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Malone?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope! We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened. So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not sin. I have failed you all. You forgave me. Captain Armor, I do not know what strength is like that. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.